and I quote, "I would mark this current season as the time that bouldering has really changed. There's always been outliers and people pushing the level, but this season really feels like the overall upper end has shifted into a higher category. It's this feeling that we're all having like, whoa, shit done changed. This is different." And that's why I've been
Yeah.
witnessing it. Sounds like you've seen some of that too.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna make a couple of controversial points here, but just to
You, Tim,
me
controversial? Huh.
controversial points in climbing, huh?
Yeah.
People love this. Okay, I kind of thought that was when I was noticing like the Will Bosey, Aiden Roberts type wave, which was just very recent, just a couple of years ago. But here's why I think it's a little bit different. I think they are a huge level up in performance athletes because they have so much other types of experience, and just it's just naturally happening over time, and just the sheer volume of people doing it at an excellent level. So you're bound to see these surges in like the coming generations. But I guess like what you notice is kind of interesting to me. How much better are the Adam Shahars, the Kai Whaleys, the Noahs of like this generation, and why are they better in what way? And like how do they actually get that at the young age that they have? Going back to like the Aiden Roberts and Will Bosey point, now what I really don't want as a controversial point to be taken is that like those guys are somehow worse than like no, they're actually just sending harder still. But what you want to look at is like the rate of how quickly some of these kids are sending. And this is the controversial point, like how much worse they are in certain ways comparatively to Will Bosey and Aiden Roberts type climbers.
Tim, my dude, good to see you, man. Happy New Year.
What's up? Happy New Year. I'm back on.
I'm laughing as I give my announcement or my opening because I'm just psyched to see you, man. How are you doing?
I'm psyched to see you too. I'm doing great. Yeah, it feels like we didn't even, it's not been that long since we recorded last. I'm just back.
I don't know, dude. Time flies when you're having fun. And just a quick reminder for any new listeners: Tim, my dude, also known as Timmy or Timothy Kang. Tim, more than just a guest, part of the Testpiece origin story. If you like this episode, I've got great news for you. There are dozens, Tim, dozens of pods me and you have done together over the years. So go check them out. And Tim, in addition to you being a Testpiece OG, you are, or recently, I should have asked you before we started, a professional climber. Let's just don't even answer that. Just let it hang there. An experienced coach. You've worked with athletes who have done as well as winning nationals. It's no joke. You've competed at World Cups. You've climbed hard as hell. You're also known for proud highballing, which was documented in the amazing film Focus. Anything else? Anything else, Tim? Did I forget anything?
I always appreciate the intro.
So, Tim, it is the season for sending. It is the new year and it is early in the new year and it is cold. Wintertime is fully upon us. I've even been spending a bunch of time out in Bishop. And when I go, I have been freaking blown away by all of the hard sending being done in Bishop. And dude, in your stomping grounds in Red Rocks, there's some sending out there. Anything you've been witness to lately?
Like specifically in Red Rocks or to this whole point?
I don't know, man. Did you? I guess you're more of a weekend warrior now, so maybe you didn't get to actually see some of those sends happen. But any big sends in your area? Maybe Noah did something. I don't know. There was some news.
Yeah, that's okay. So it's true. I do have to like put the if we were just having a conversation, I'd just be like, yeah, I saw this session, and like a lot of them are kind of just normal occurrences nowadays. Like so for example, like just one perspective, I've been actually trying Trieste, which is a very awesome V14 test piece here in Red Rocks. But that to be said, I do run into people trying Shaolin because Shaolin is like 5 feet to the right. It actually starts on the same as Trieste sit. It just goes right. And so I've gotten to see most people try Shaolin who's tried it this year. I would say just on the point of Shaolin, because I know last episode that I was on, we talked about Shaolin and we even made a bet, which I'm just super curious how that bet's going to go. And I actually talked about this bet with Noah last time when I saw Noah Wheeler trying it. Okay, first things first. Yeah, absolutely. Sending is crazy, just in general. The first thing I notice is like, it just seems like there's no season for sending anymore. It just seems like the kids nowadays are just going to go out and send whenever they want to send. It just seems like it's a totally different outlook and performance climbing that some of the people that we'll probably talk about today have. And it's just crazy. I don't have like a bunch of answers or anything. It just, obviously, Josh and I, we always have speculation as to like why things lead to other things. Of course, there's a reason, but overall I don't have like direct opinions, but I'll share some observations. So other than that, the only person I've seen actually be like very strong on Shaolin is Noah Wheeler, and I've watched pretty much everybody else who's been trying it try it at least a little bit. And I know we made kind of our bet on the premise that like, oh, Kai, who's like an up and coming stronger climber nowadays, like meaning that he hasn't like established or done a bunch of V15s or harder. He's really only showcased his harder climbing in his local area, which he grew up in, but now is also proving that he can go to like Bishop, which by the way, he's also kind of grown up climbing in. He's also crushing there, but more. And so this isn't to take away on Kai's ability, more so say like those are his credentials, but it's also interesting to compare him to other people who climb extremely difficult climbs all around the world, like Zach Gala, who comes here, and then I can have a better assessment of like how hard is Shaolin when I'm watching him climb it. And it does look really hard. And to be fair, like Zach's one of the only people not trying the jump beta for the first jump. He's trying the shoulder kind of high foot drop knee type beta, but he's not dropping his knee. So anyway, I've seen a lot of people try it. I've seen like how difficult. I've even tried it myself a little bit now. And yeah, I watched a guy who basically did Trieste in like 3 tries. His name's Toru from Japan. He's like 31. Seemed like a family man from the countryside. He just absolutely walked up Trieste, which for context doesn't happen that often. I believe Will Bosey didn't even do Trieste after he did Return of the Sleepwalker. So like Trieste is a stout test piece for the grade, but man, this guy made it look like V9. After he had that same session, he did Trieste as a warm up. He was trying Shaolin for like 2 hours, and then he decided to go to Black Velvet right after that to go and try Return. It was crazy. But during the 2 hours of watching him try Shaolin, he couldn't really link the bottom into the jumps, and he was the only person I actually seen do all the moves in the link. I haven't seen anybody other than him until Noah do even the bottom moves, which if you watch Sean Bailey's Shaolin video, he kind of doesn't even explain the bottom. He just says it's like a V13 into like V16 jumping. That doesn't seem true anymore. It seems to me like everybody's crux is the bottom to get into the jumps. And honestly, some other people, though, make the jumps look a little bit easier than maybe Sean made it seem. But I would say that what I'm learning is that the jumps seem really difficult to do after the bottom climbing. Anyway, all that being said, really my point there was Noah's a savage. Watching him like really own these jumps, own the lower climbing into the jumps, just comparatively, like I've had a lot of cool insight from watching other people climb. A lot of same insights going to Bishop and just seeing the news in Bishop. It's been pretty insane to watch the climbers.
All right, the title of this segment is Noah is a Savage. Yeah, so just for some context on Shaolin and the last episode we did, yeah, we made a bet. I guess I made a bet. I said that I thought that I bet $100 that Shaolin would stay at V17. And did I say that for Return also? Or was that? I can't. Was there another?
I remember
V17?
talking about it.
Was it? I can't remember what other V17. I thought. Anyways, I put $100 on Shaolin staying at V17. We didn't know how we were going to confirm that. I guess we're going to wait for like the second or third Ascensions. Yeah. Well, how about we just leave it on Noah? We'll decide if Noah he'll be the
so
barometer.
I asked him.
Yeah, what do you say? I'm curious.
Well, he kind of dictated on how quickly he would do it. Like he was like, honestly, he was like, for sure, if I do it right now, like this session, then I would downgrade it. And I was like, see, this is super interesting. Like, we even talked about like, would we guess if Kai would downgrade it? And like it's downgrading or like grading as a whole is like dependent on lots of different factors. So that's why that bet is just kind of interesting. Like I actually have no idea. I actually am 50-50. Obviously it's like just more reasonable to expect someone would just keep the grade because it's just kind of how people do things. But like I would just interrogate the person and be like, but what really do you think the grade is? And hopefully get the person to downgrade it if they thought that way. But it's pretty interesting, his opinion.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, Shaolin, because you did say this, but I don't know if people realize that it starts on the same jug start as Trieste. I guess it's like Trieste low or sit or whatever, but it doesn't really. Yeah. It seems like people nowadays seem to be kind of always starting Trieste from there. Am I right about that?
No, not necessarily. Actually, most people show up, try to do the stand, and then Actually, I've seen it like pretty much 50-50 if people see Trieste as like the sit line is the pure line or the stand is the pure line. That just for context, have you been to Trieste, Josh?
No, no.
Like it's a very obvious ledge, but it climbs horribly. Like your feet just hang completely under. It's just like it's a really weird hold to grab, and like just kind of more a matter of like ethic. Like in my opinion and in my experience, the true line is the one that was put up first. Like even you can talk about what if you showed up to the boulder, what would you see as, but that's impossible. You didn't show up. You didn't show up before there was any chalk on it. You have to show up now as like, I know that P Rob did this boulder first ascended at the stand start. So I know that the Trieste boulder is the stand start. It seems more likely that you should just start it from this obvious like ledge. But
I totally agree with you. And there, I feel like Jamie Emerson, aka the sheriff, would be like, dude, that is where the first ascensionist started. So that is the boulder. But then what if you get someone who just starts a boulder at a really dumb place? Like, does that somehow take
totally.
precedent? And
Well, that's
I
the
mean,
point.
yeah, yeah. But and you would think that, and also I'd wonder, I don't know the history of him doing it, but it makes you wonder if he wanted to start from the low, kind of like, the
Right.
singularity. Remember how
Yeah.
Tim Clifford like started kind of one move
I don't know
up.
this history.
Okay, singularity is that like one move or like it's a
V15.
very stout 15 in Squamish. There's a very obvious jug start, and then you do a big lock off to a crimp, and then
Mm,
you kind of like do the move.
okay.
Or I don't know, I could be missing one move in between there, but that lock off move, he started it from that upper crimp, and then I think Nale was the one who did it from the lower
But your
hold, and
point
now
being that Tim knew that
Tim,
it obviously started
actually, I
lower.
don't really know that. I don't want to throw him under the bus, but anyways, it's kind of a weird thing where like, what if you walk up the boulder, you know where you should start, you're planning on doing that. It's like, actually, here's a better example. It happens in sport climbing. People will have chains to like an obvious finish that they bolt, and then they can't make it there, and they just like put chains to the lower part that they make it there, and they're like, oh, pitch one, it's this.
Yeah.
And that's kind of whack. So I don't know,
Yeah.
some
And actually, okay, so just to end on this point, like, or to end the Trieste point, I think if you took that same philosophy, went to Trieste, it actually wouldn't be that obvious to start in the jug because the climbing isn't obvious. It actually is just like, oh, it would be nice if it started there. Now you get stronger climbers who are like, of course you could start here. That's not the same thing as showing up being like, oh, you should start on this jug. Because again, to explain the Trieste. Now, for me personally, like I'm gonna do Trieste and then I'm gonna do Trieste sit. Like that's should be stated. I think most people just do that, but people see them as two different boulders for sure. The hard thing is that the grade just doesn't change that much. It does change probably half a grade, but what do you do with half a grade? You add a whole grade. That's the problem. People are like, okay, here's actually my speculation is that people just don't believe that Trieste sits V15. People know Trieste is 14, would rather just take 14 for the whole line and just do it from the sit because they don't want to be called soft climbers. Actually, this would be a major part of a lot of our discussion on hard grading. Is I just think that most people don't want to be called soft climbers. I don't care. So I'm just gonna do on under our context of this conversation. I just care about what's a pure line, like what's the first line, like I just want to climb because otherwise I would just show up to the rock with no context whatsoever and just like do what moves are cool, right? But no, I just want to repeat the history and just understand their interpretation of it. But
oh
there's
man.
an enormous association with who you are and how good you are with the grade that you climb. So unfortunately, Josh is it a lot behind the grade and where people pick.
That is such a huge can of worms. You probably didn't listen to the pod I did with Nathaniel, but we did like a follow up kind of, like a little bonus thing that was after we
Cool.
had clicked stop. Well, it wasn't like a real fall. It was just, how sometimes we're still talking after the episode ends. And he talked a little bit about the grading and not wanting to be looked at as soft, like, and he said, look, I think that it's V17 based on what all the other V17s are out there. Now, if all those V17s become V16, that's a different story. But one of his things was he was like, I don't want people to think of me as being soft. And my defense to him was, I was like, dude, you're having this discussion with, Sean Rabbitoux, Noah Wheeler, Daniel, with all the people, like they're sessioning on it with you and they're helping you with the grade. And I just felt like he has some insulation because that community is the one helping him determine the grade.
Sure.
But I guess that's different from like the armchair experts like me. being like, oh, dude, that this guy or this guy, Shaolin Soft or whatever.
Right, right. Yeah. No, it's definitely interesting. One thing I heard through like the Instagram reels that you were posting, which I thought were awesome picks for, your Nathaniel episode. Or I mean, I didn't compare it to the whole episode, but I love what I was hearing with Nathaniel. I just love hearing Nathaniel talk about climbing. Honestly, I hope all of you guys do. His stuff is great. Um, and he was saying that he thought that there would be like a mass exodus of grades probably at some point, and I like totally agree with that point. I think in a slightly different way, I just think that there's going to be a reinterpretation of how grades actually just are, because grades just historically tend to just showcase certain types of things, and it's probably best off to, I guess, like, without getting into the weeds of it, I think it's best off to have grades represent like what they actually are. And it's just more, the point is like grades, like probably people have a problem with what grades actually represent, because in their opinion the grade doesn't represent what they did on the climbing. And so like people just want to know like what they actually are accomplishing, right? And so if grades don't do that, then grades need to be reinterpreted. So I agree entirely. I think there's going to be a mass reinterpretation of how grades are seen in climbing. It's going to take
Okay.
years, in my
Okay, we
opinion.
can't go too deep into that.
No,
I
we
want
can't.
to expand that. Just it's like 15 podcasts. And then we'll never get solved. Actually, what I'm hearing for you is that I might win the $100 bet from you
Yes,
in the near future, but in the long future, maybe
maybe I'll
not.
get it back.
I do want to just say one more thing about what Nathaniel said, because I can't remember if this made it into a reel or not, but it's not that he was like, there's definitely going to be a mass exodus out of V17. One of his insights was that he felt like perhaps we stayed at V15 too long, and that
Oh, right.
grade range was too large, and that it's not that we've necessarily totally cemented V16. And I think I may have made this comment something like 20 years from now it'll be obvious to us. We're like, this was obviously V15 or V16, and this V15 should have been V16, or whatever you want to shuffle around. But I thought that was an interesting idea of, this is where you said something along the lines of the grade should really represent the
Yeah.
experience and the challenge. But then because there's so much social pressure and it's part of being a pro, part of getting paid, that the grades get morphed, and then maybe in hindsight they start to settle.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I'm gonna not respond to
Okay.
this because I have so many thoughts. But yeah, okay, let's
Tim,
move on.
Tim, I
Have this
want
conversation
I
later.
want I want to circle back to the topic at hand, which is Noah Wheeler is a savage. But that was actually the subtext to what the topic was supposed to be, Tim. It was just, I, I mean, when I reached out to you and was like, please hop on. I saw so much stuff in Bishop. I've been watching the news. I've been texting with Noah and seeing everyone just do amazing things. And I just want to put out there that the young generation have completely arrived, and this year things are different. And I'm going to back that up with a little text message thread I had with Carlo Traversi. I asked him very explicitly, can I say this stuff on the pod? So Carlo, don't get angry. I checked with you. I was just like, damn, Carlo, like, these kids are crushing. It's amazing what they're doing right now. And he wrote to me, and I quote, I would mark this current season as the time that bouldering has really changed. There's always been outliers and people pushing the level, but this season really feels like the overall upper end has shifted into a higher category. And so this was an easy transition for me after us talking about grades, because we can talk about grades, but what they're actually still pointing to is this concept. And it's this feeling that we're all having, like, whoa, shit done changed. This is different. And that's why I've been
Yeah.
witnessing it. Sounds like you've seen some of that too.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna make a couple of controversial points here, but just to
You, Tim,
me
controversial? Huh.
controversial points in climbing, huh?
Yeah.
People love this. Okay, the controversial point will come in a second. The first point is, yeah, I saw that text message screenshot between you and Carlo, and instantly I was like, yeah, that's a really good point to make. I 100% agree. I think like what Daniel Woods and like Paul and Jimmy and them did, like over a decade ago for bouldering, and really to showcase in rock climbing, like how much of a level up can you have towards like a certain style of movement on rock. I think they really did that, and this actually is like the next step from that generation. And I think that the controversial point's coming. But like I kind of thought that was when I was noticing like the Will Bosey, Aiden Roberts type wave, which was just very recent, just a couple of years ago. But here's why I think it's a little bit different. I think they are a huge level up in performance athletes because they have so much other types of experience. And, just we can talk about a lot of these factors that happen as time goes on in your sport or like in your activity. No matter what you do, there's always going to be an enormous, just surge of research and like people just, working hard, like whatever you want to say happens in development or progression. It's just naturally happening over time and just the sheer volume of people doing it at an excellent level. So it's just my point is like you're bound to see these surges in like the coming generations. But I guess like what you notice is kind of interesting to me, of like how much better are the Adam Shahars, the Kai Whaleys, the Noahs of like this generation, and why are they better in what way, and like how do they actually get that at the young age that they have? Going back to like the Aiden Roberts and Will Bosey point, now what I really don't want as a controversial point to be taken is that like those guys are somehow worse than like, no, they're actually just sending harder still than even what. But what you want to look at is like the rate of how quickly some of these kids are sending, and this is the controversial point, like how much worse they are in certain ways comparatively to Will Bosey and Aiden Roberts type climbers, right? And like there's a whole list of names that I'm not mentioning. Those are just like the immediate one that comes to mind is Will Bosey, someone who's like not really a bouldering background, someone who's like sport climbing background. His build doesn't look like he should just be able to like yard on smaller holds or like super powerful moves, yet he got noticed many years after having a ton of success in like sport climbing or sport climbing competitions. He got noticed by sending the hardest boulders in the world. And so what that showed to me was like, well, his baseline foundations of a rock climbing performer are like what I would want to shape myself towards when I'm like in my late 20s, but these guys are not in their late 20s. Adam Shahar is like in his, I actually don't know how old
He's
Adam Shahar is,
19.
but I'm pretty sure he's like,
He's
yeah,
19.
19.
When I
Noah's like
interviewed
what,
him, he was like,
21?
I was like, how old are you? He's like, I'm almost 19. And you're young when you're talking about how old you're about to be. Sorry,
Yeah.
Adam. I love you.
I turned 26 in like a month and a half, and I'm gonna tell you I'm 25 until I turn 26. Like I'm not almost 26. I'm definitely, yeah. It's pretty interesting. Dang, I'm feeling a little bit older now that we're talking about it. But anyway, yeah. Don't make your comments because you're gonna. Anyway, the biggest point there to make is like when I watch, and okay, another point to make on Noah. So really, the points there are like honestly, out of the whole crew, the younger generation, the two biggest people I'm noticing, and not a hit on anybody else, but really Noah Wheeler and Adam Shahar are like by far the biggest jumps in bouldering performance I've seen. Obviously, specifically outdoors, right? Like Noah doesn't even really compete, and Adam's only had a couple of opportunities to compete at the big stage, and I wouldn't even care if they competed. The competitions don't test how good these guys are. Like that's the whole point of like why competitions suck. Okay, that's a whole other podcast.
Tim, calm down. We have other podcasts for that. Yeah,
I always have energy.
They definitely do stand out. I agree.
Yeah. And when I have, I don't talk to Adam a ton, but I get to talk to Noah just by happenstance, like every now and then. And when we talk, I think maybe the first time I mentioned Noah on podcast, like immediately after it aired, he actually texted me on Instagram. We had talked before a little bit, but he texted me on Instagram because I think I made a similar point where I was like, when I saw Noah try Sleepwalker for the first time, he showed up injured. He showed up with tape, horrible skin. His tactics on the session were horrible. Like, just like small little things. And he was like, the way he texted me was actually, I couldn't tell at that time if it was like totally genuine or he was like, Tim's just such a dick. Like, I just want to like get him to look even worse. But no, he actually just texted me and he was like, what did you mean? Like, how could I improve? And I was like, whoa. I was like, before I even tell you any of that, dude, like just the fact that you can humbly ask someone like me that, who like, why would you care about my opinion? Like, I'm not better than you, not even currently, I'm not even showing you any better results than you have currently. And I can say that, but that's cool that you can see it that way. I was like, that's the first thing that I think makes you really good, is that you're willing to ask that question. And maybe that could be like my opinion on the rest of the generation as a whole, is that maybe they're noticing that you can't just be like isolated in your own views in climbing. You have to really absorb everybody else before you, what they did well and what they didn't do well, and just keep iterating off. That doesn't mean you're going to be perfect today. And I think they're also acknowledging that like, oh, I won't have all the tactics. So I can ask someone like Tim, even if he's not performing on the V15 as well as I am, like maybe I could still ask him his insight. And since then, I will say, sorry, last point, I'll hand it back to you. But since then, Noah and I just talked about this because I just saw him like 2 weeks ago at Shaolin, or like a week ago. And the biggest point we were talking about live in person was how much he has improved. First thing he said, he was like, dude, I showed up and my skin was so good and it makes everything so much easier. I was like, that's amazing. That's awesome. Like, that's so cool. There's still probably a ton about tactics. I brought a little mini fan and he's like, oh, I got to get me one of those. I was like, yes, I'm learning tactics too.
By the way, did you just casually emphasize the downgrade on Sleepwalker to V15 as you were talking about it?
Actually, those 2 points were not correlated.
Okay, because you were saying V15, sure. You were talking about. Okay, sorry, that's just.
You're right. Yeah.
Again, a whole nother.
Actually, I think the consensus might come down that way.
Yeah. Anyways, I really don't like it. Yeah, I totally remember when we talked about Noah, and then he reached out to you, and I think the way you put it was more just that he was like a raw talent.
That's my point here too.
Yeah, and I think, and it's so cool that he also feels that way, because let's take the opposite approach. I think Noah's 20 now. Let's say maybe he was 19 then. Let's say you think that you've got it all figured out. Oh, really? Mm-hmm. So you got nothing else to learn. You're 19.
Yeah.
You got nowhere else to go. Like that's the worst mentality you could have.
Totally.
And yeah, I got to see Adam Shahar in Bishop. And by the way, when I first talked to Noah, he was like, oh, dude, you got to talk to Adam. Like, you think I'm good on the boards? Like, you got to talk to Adam. They definitely grew up recognizing each other's extra strength in that board style. Although, dude, I could just sit here and name off like 10 other guys that are similarly strong. Maybe one tiny little half a notch beneath them. Yeah. But then I watch them all in the buttermilks just sessioning lucid dreaming, or chucking a lap on direct north, or just doing mandala sit because it was there first try, just all the oh, should we flash the swarm? Oh yeah, like let's all try to flash the swarm, and then maybe they don't do it, but they just run a train on it in 10 minutes. All these climbs that used to be test pieces and are now kind of thought as warm-ups. And seeing Adam, I didn't see Adam do this, but I was the next day, knowing Adam flash Rastaman vibration, which is the crux move on lucid dreaming. And I mean, I know it's not exactly the crux. I mean, it's that iconic jump move, but I know it's not just like you have to go from the undercling to the pinch. It's a multiple move. Yeah,
I think Rastaman's the crux move of lucid, but yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Some people seem to have different. It seems to be like different people can like really ISO that undercling and reach up and really own that undercling, and then other people, I don't know. I don't know enough about it. I still haven't pulled onto it, so I can't say. But the fact that he flashed that move that we have talked about on the podcast as potentially being one of the hardest moves in the world, and we must be wrong on that. Or Adam's one of the strongest in the world, which we're probably right on. Get done. And then, dude, I just watched that move get done over and over. Brian Squire, dude, Austin Hoyt just did lucid dreaming.
I know.
I'm there's other names like, and while I'm sitting there watching them on it, I won't keep on naming names, especially not just of the young generation, but there's another V16 project that looks like it's about to go right between. I mean, long been known, but now it's going to go this year. And then there's people on Devolution, another V16. The process is getting done a bunch too. I don't know how much of that is public, but the process is getting done. And it's just like V16, V16, V16. And these guys are not sitting under the boulder for 2 months, dedicating their life to doing this V16 or whatever the case may be. They're doing it and then saying, what's next? That was Monday. What am I doing on Tuesday?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt on this point. But this is a lot of what I'm thinking about. And I'm curious if you had any like conversations with them or insights. Cause last time I saw, I think Brian Squire and Kai and them, I had to like go to bed at 9:30 for work in the morning. And I forgot who asked me, but somebody asked me if they could come over and use my hot tub. And they all walked in. I hadn't seen them at all on their trip to Red Rocks, but they just came in, grabbed towels and went to the hot tub, came out, and I was already in bed for work the next morning. I was like, yeah, cool. See you guys later. And so I don't really. My point is like I don't really talk to them too much about this stuff. Right now, I'm just interested in watching it, and really just watching it through the news. I know Bishop, and I don't have to like sit there and watch them on the sessions. I showed up like minutes after Adam did Lucid Dreaming, and I just told him congrats, and I walked away because I was only in Bishop for a weekend. My question for you is like, have you had any insights? And this is really my guess as to why their level up is so. This is the main guess at the main foundational reason why I think they're so much better right now. Because there's like obvious physical factors I can say that they're way ahead in, which I think it's just a function of time and comfort on what they're doing. But the question I have is on the mental side, which is like it's kind of exactly what you just said, like, oh, what's next? And like when I went to Bishop, I knew the lore so well that I also knew how difficult some climbs were. But that's other people's interpretation. And I'm curious, like, do you have any more insight on like how you view their interpretation of how challenging these things are? Or do they just really care about like, I'm gonna go and shit. I'm just gonna go and sorry, I almost said I'm gonna go and just crush.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is just one of these factors of they've known about these climbs. And so they're just going to do them in a way, that whole standing on the shoulders of those that came before you, where, I mean, if it's already been done, they
Yeah,
know they
of
can do
course.
it. And Adam was like, oh, I want to flash Rastaman vibration. And
Yeah,
so he
it's
did.
absurd.
Like, I mean, you don't, you know, you couldn't have P. Rob or Daniel Woods, whichever one you want to pick, come up and think that they're going to flash that in the sense, or because like they're like Lucid is the project and they're trying to even do it. So they're not going to, they weren't going to walk up and flash the crux move of the hardest boulder in the world at that time.
Yeah.
You know, and so the idea of their mentality, I mean, something that I see in their mentality is they don't seem to be quite as serious. Like they're not taking themselves so seriously. Like sometimes when you get older and you've been doing it for a long time, I feel like you put even more weight on just like, this is a hard boulder. This is very meaningful. These guys are still kind of in the playful phase where they're just, they're kind of blowing their own minds where they're just like, oh, I just did this classic and this classic. And like, I can't, I was talking to Bryce Viola, and when he talked about talking to Austin Hoyt about the swarm, Austin described that crux crimp, the left-hand crimp that you go to, as a jug. Right. And so this is like a fingertip splitting, brutal, hard crimp. And the reason why I bring that up is that it's one of those things where it's just that like frame shift. Like it's not a jug. He doesn't think it's a jug, but calling it a jug brings it down to a manageable level, because for him it's like V13, V14. I mean, like it's not easy, but I think there's something there. What I thought you were going to ask about that whole what's next question that I find kind of interesting is, it's like, okay, you guys just did Lucid. Okay, um, now you're going to do the process next. Okay. Oh, you did devolution. Oh, you just also did that climb, that new project, but it was shown to you, was spoon fed to you. Here's the climb. It's right in front of you. It's ticked up. My hunch is I wouldn't be surprised if one of those young guns pulls that off. But I do think that it takes a little bit of age to shift into this next mentality of like, I'm going to push the limits. And so I just did a pod with Zach, and I don't know if you've talked to Zach about this, Zach Gala. Something I was really impressed with him, Tim, is that his sights are just set on hunting the biggest megas in the world. Like he doesn't like go like, oh, well, I did the process, so what's next to the process, right? It's like, okay, here is the world of boulders, or even climbs, not just boulders. What is the most badass climb that I'm inspired with that I can go do? And I just, when I see Adam Shahar, and I don't want, this is not me picking on him, but it's like, I think he like had just done Rastaman or something. Then he's just like, he went around the corner and did direct north first try. And it's just because it's there. And now for me, it was like, oh, those are hard lines that are iconic test pieces that you build up to. But he's just kind of doing what's in front of him. And now he's only 18. He's just started school. He's not necessarily able to just go book a plane ticket to go do Burden of Dreams next, or whatever sick project might be hiding for him in Switzerland or something. But that's going to be interesting mental shift. Like
Yeah.
instead of it's just being right there, like the whole world is your oyster now.
Yeah. That brings up a totally different point that I was thinking about, but that's a super interesting. Yeah, it's so funny. Like, I feel like, yeah, I guess like what I was kind of pointing out was they, it is more just like a validation of how strong they actually are. Like, but physically and technically for sure. And then like the mental reframing seems to be the easiest, quickest way to be like, maybe it's just not as hard as like you think. And what happens when you think it's not as hard? Like maybe you just give it 100% of your effort. And as long as you're not cocky and like you're actually just trying to pay attention still, this is what's happening. These kids are just better and
Okay,
stronger.
just let me interrupt you right there because didn't what I didn't say when I read out Carlos' thing was something actually that makes Carlos so freaking badass. And you know, Carlo, I mean, one of the best climbers. I think still underrated, to be honest. So
Mhm.
here's how Carlo finished off that conversation, because I said something about like, "Wow, geez, you guys seem so strong to me, but now with this new group, like, there's a clear notch ahead, right?" So he said, "It took me a bit by surprise as well. It's a good reminder that it's difficult for your vision for what is possible to extend too far
Mhm.
beyond what you know." God, I think he wrote that a little bit weird, and I'm probably reading it weird, but you can see what he's saying there, where he's like, man, maybe I should have called that swarm hold a jug. Maybe I
Totally.
should have tried to flash Rasta man vibrate. But he's calling out vision. He's not saying like it would be lucky if I had fingers like Noah Wheeler. Like that doesn't get you anywhere.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, that comment's very interesting to me, though. Like, I agree with Carlo's point about, like, maybe I should always reframe what I think is the ceiling. I definitely don't want to call this wormhole a jug, and I'll tell you why. Because it just adjusts all of my foundations. And as a highballer, for example, like my mind's going towards highballing. Like I think like Zach, where it's like for me though, in my local challenges, I'm not the strongest boulderer in the world. I'm not even close to the strongest board climber in the world. I'm not that interested right now in that type of stuff. What I'm interested in is pushing my limits, which like currently right now I'm pretty psyched on this highball I just tried. Project. It's a project. It hasn't been done, but it's been done on TR. People ask that all the time. They're like, "Oh, but has it been done?" I'm like, yeah, it's been a done line, but like no one's taking the rope off. Like, when you're free soloing, you're pushing the limits of like, can you do it without a rope? Like, can you take a rope off, possibly die on it if you don't do it perfectly? And what derives perfect movement? Like, what allows you to believe that you're not gonna fall on this move? And that's my point is like, if I call something a slightly wrong interpretation of what I understand I should do with the hold, I don't think I'm going to do the move perfectly. Now, I think when you're much stronger than a climb and you call it a jug, what happens with that? Yeah, you just try. It's so much easier, and you put a lot less like strain on your effort. Like you don't doubt your effort, so I think you just go through it fluidly. But studying perfection, I think, takes a ton of micro nuance to like what actually happens though if I pull on a hold this way, or like yeah, it's a jug this way, but also like what does it take away from my feet? Like when you're slab climbing or climbing vert and you're climbing to be not just a little bit more or less tired at like 30 feet, like how you grab a hold is way more important than how you think a hold is a jug or not. That's kind of like the interesting thing that comes to my mind when I don't want to just reframe everything to be like on Trieste. Like for example, I've never stuck this last right hand move before you jump to like the finishing hold until this year, and now I've stuck it 20 times or so, or a little bit more, and it's still a pretty bad hold. Like objectively, the hold is just horrible. But I feel like everything I'm doing with my body makes the hold usable the way I should use it. And now it feels like the position is way easier than I ever would have thought. And I think that's what Austin's trying to say. I don't think, dude, the swarm hold is literally basically an index finger that's a spike. It's like the hold seems or looks worse than the lucid dreaming pinch, which I'd be really curious, sorry, just a totally different point, but defying gravity has been being thrown around as the hardest single move in the world. But it's like, I'm really curious, like, how you measure that against the Rastaman vibrations move. Like, maybe it's more inconsistent. And I'm not saying I totally doubt it. I'm just curious, like, with all the people who've tried those two moves, like, back and forth, like, which one's actually harder for what reasons? Like, one might be more consistent, but is consistency a factor of making some move difficult? Like, that one
Adam
just shocked me, just by the
Adam's
way.
the guy to ask. He's done them both
Yeah,
and did them
because
quickly.
Nathaniel's done a sit start to defying gravity on the hardest move in the world after you do V13. I don't think you can do V13 to the lucid jump right now, like in the same shape that these guys are in.
I don't know. Yeah,
I don't know. I have
who
no idea.
knows? Yeah, I don't know. um, yeah, I
Sorry,
like,
lots of points.
no, well, what I like is classic Tim, where this is where your love of mastery shines through, where it's like, it's not a jug, be honest, and then use it
Hmm.
appropriately. Like, don't lie. It's, that's not, reframing is not like, reframing may be a better thought of in the context we're talking about is, these climbs were done, and they were done in a different time than mine. I am a good climber as well. Perhaps I can do this climb quickly and easily, not because those climbers suck, but because I am good and I've learned a lot and I am strong as well. And I climbed on boards my whole life. So I just like that, rather than just having like total delusional, like, because I do hate when people hose you on that. Oh, dude, it's a totally jug, and you're like, dude, this is not a fucking jug. Like, why did you lie to me? Like,
Yeah.
and that actually brings up a point that I had written, where I've talked about this new young blood, just amazing season, and all the things that are getting sent, and asked why, and the most common answer I get is board climbing. And what's interesting is that someone even pointed out to me that the gap is between kind of like your age, old 25-year-olds, just ancient 25-year-olds, and then kind of like 18-year-olds. And it's not that you didn't, I mean, I know you put your time on the moon board, but what if it was there and you were climbing on there since you were 10? What if that
Yeah,
was
yeah.
climbing to you? And I don't know, do you have any thoughts on the
Oh my god,
role
yeah.
boards play in this amazing kind of level up we've seen?
Okay, I have a totally separate thought that's going to connect to this thought. But to your thought, yeah, absolutely. I have the same speculation. I think, look at what they're choosing to climb. That's the first thing I think we should study is of the generation that we're talking about, of all the generations that we're talking about that are quote unquote like just so much stronger than everybody else. It's like, well, I came from California and I grew up climbing in Tuolumne and like, yes, like not really Yosemite, but like Bishop. And I knew that these places were kind of like stomping grounds for the Ron Cowks, the Lonnie Cowks, the John Backers of the world. And like, honestly, I don't know how many people are like at their level in what they are good at. All I care about is rock climbing, rock climbing, climbing. I don't care what you're climbing on. I care about climbing. And what I'm interested in my lifetime, Josh, is like, can we study who can climb the best? But obviously, you have to pick a certain realm and a path of like what climbing best actually looks like, or like what are you testing, right? And like all I test is like IQ of everything, like your comfort and movement, footwork, like studying training. Like, do you know at least you can get yourself to climbing lucid dreaming? Okay, do you actually need to go and climb lucid dreaming? So I think like one thing's for sure, in the last 10 or 20 years, access to hard training, specifically in a board style, is just way more frequent. It's a given. So things are becoming a given to train in certain ways, just like how climbing slab was probably just a given, like way back. And it's not a given anymore. It's not, right? So like also things are being lost. Like we should not just talk about in this podcast, like how crazy the level is going in a good way, but like what are they losing? Like ain't no one talking to me about who wants to highball with me. Like nobody's talking about this project, Josh. I'm not saying that in any sort of way to like put me up on a pedestal. Not at all. I don't care about that like at all. But what it's very interesting is that people don't care about that stuff. But what I care about is like what's like the most interesting way that I would want to watch climbing like 20 years, 50 years from now. And it's like honestly, I don't know. It's really hard to tell the difference, honestly, between just like two really difficult movements. Like what you can feel and the sensations in climbing that's difficult is like try okay, the first time you try a top row, like ever, just any 5'9". Like it's exhausting. It's very easy for people to understand that like endurance climbing is very difficult, right? And like another thing is very interesting to me. I just watched last night just because I was actually just interested. I rewatched also because I've been getting pretty psyched on going to try Jumbo Love finally. Um, I watched Supreme Jumbo Love again. And just to think about Jumbo Love being, you climb this like 512 pitch to a no hands rest, then you do like 100+ foot long 15B. Well, Seb showed up, did that, then did a 14D with essentially no rest into the 15B Jumbo Love. How hard is that? I have no idea, Josh. I don't think anybody in climbing really has too much of an idea. Like less than 10 people in the whole world have even remotely an idea of how difficult that is. And it got me really interested in being like, well, what if these people took this bouldering this level of bouldering, flashing Rasta man, and taking that to like the endurance test? Or like, what's the middle ground? That my point here being that like, okay, in bouldering, in this particular style of Shaolin, Defying Gravity, and Lucid process, all four styles you can probably categorize into, even in bouldering being a really similar style, like board climbing. Well, what all the techniques that we know in climbing as a whole, bring my circling my point together, of all the techniques, efficiencies, training tactics, efficiency tactics in a 3 hour long session or whatever, like of all the things that we know have an effect on the performance, potential performance output of a climber, how many of them are being tested by the current generation on these climbs? Like, not that many, right? It's an obvious point. And so, like, what is it actually? Not to take away from like how impressive it is in this style, in this factor of climbing, or in this facet of climbing. Of course, it's crazy impressive, but I do want to make sure we're not taking away from the fact that like climbing as a whole is humongous. There's a lot of really difficult climbing out there for lots of different reasons, and I would love to see this apply down the whole chain.
Okay, so what you just said that really stood out was that first thing where it's look at what they're climbing. So of course the boards are relevant background, and I just can't help but hear Adam Shahar, well, he said this on the podcast saying like,
I know.
no, but dude, boards are what has made me strong, and he can climb slab. And so I'm just playing devil's advocate here where it's like, fundamental strength in climbing is still like a part of the ceiling, right? So you take Adam Ondra, and I would actually argue that Adam Ondra, maybe Nale, they're the best movers we may have ever seen. And I mean, I don't think that Noah would be upset if we said that, hey, he's still a little raw and he's not moving as well as some of those people. Now he has the physical strength, so he clearly has that capacity, but has he learned how to move in all the ways that he can and probably will as he gets exposed to more types of climbing? Although I will say, it's not just, he also has, he's unlocked some interesting movement ability, like his Gastones, his like far shoulder ability. I mean, there's something that he does there on the boards and these kind of, I mean, he came in the pod and said this. He argued that, I think this was for his good to great concept, was that the best climbs in the world, or sorry, the hardest climbs in the world have moves that are awkward, are weird.
Yeah.
And he's gotten good at that. And, it's like, how do you make something awkward, not awkward? It's like strength and technique, right? Make it, if you have a big Gaston, it's not just power. It's about like understanding how, move weight onto it, or whatever the case may be. So I'm kind of rambling here, but I will say that I agree with you that where we're seeing the limits get pushed seems to be in direct correlation with the training tools that were available to the young kids. And that's the boards, and the climbs they're doing that are hard look like those climbs. And I got to tell you, walking up to Grandpa Peabody, and I haven't really been to Bishop a ton for the last 5 years. I look up at the process, and I've been on the boards a lot in those last 5 years. And I did not try the process. I severely doubt I could do the process, but it also doesn't look that it doesn't look that outrageous in a way too. You're like, oh, there's some holds on a steep flat wall. Oh, those holds are like in cut. Oh, there's feet. Like, it's powerful. You go like, interesting. And no wonder they're housing it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's never, to me also, sorry, just on that literal, just that point, like I've always walked up with the process and been like, doesn't look like anything I need to figure out. I just need to get stronger. And those are, again, I specifically have like pushed myself in the career of climbing in the opposite way, where I'm like, I just want to find challenges to me. And this is in no way, shape, or form to say like what I think is better, or this is not the point of the conversation. That's a personal conversation. I'm happy to have that, and I have an opinion there. That's not this opinion. Well, obviously I make my life choices based on what I think is better, but my life choices were literally, for climbing specifically, were just towards like, well, let's say you took my strength away. Like, how hard do I climb? And that's what, when you're bringing up Adam Anja or Nale or like Serato, like Serato is someone who I think is a very strong sense of strength. Obviously he's very strong, but like you compare the level he's outputting in result. Like, okay, Serato, you just climbed a bunch of climbs. Let's look at the last 10 hardest climbs you have done. Okay, they're a level that we understand. Well, we can compare that amongst other strong rock climbers. Maybe we don't count them as technically sound in movement as you are, but let's see the level that they think this climb is. I would have guessed that the hardest climbs that Serato has done are pretty much in line with the hardest climbs everybody else has done. But I would say that if you strength tested Serato, he would fall way behind in numbers. So clearly just the correlation of your strength, like basically I'm playing devil's advocate to your devil's advocate point here. Like, while I agree with actually, so when I heard Adam say that on an Instagram reel, instantly I was like, nah. But then I heard his point, and to his point, yes, to be good at the way that he is good at climbing, there is no faster way to get good at climbing in that way than just climb with a straightforward movement. I do a ton of that in my movement because I know that's the fastest way to get stronger at straightforward pulling. But how you apply that to the rest of your movement, I have learned, in my opinion, and I'm curious what his opinion is the next decade. Like, what does that take away from, though? Like, yes, it adds a ton, but I know in my experience in climbing that everything I get blinds me from something else that I can learn. I've shared this on the podcast a bunch of times before. And I think climbing for me has always been interesting in, like, yes, I need to get stronger. Yes, I need to get better. And yes, I need to strengthen my mind. And all three of those things, some of them correlate, some of them take away from each other, but they definitely have their own ceilings. What you and I have always talked about, Josh, is what is the lead domino? And the only argument I'll make here is, well, first I'll make the devil's advocate to myself, which is I am shocked. I am shocked how far you can take that ceiling of power is one thing. That's really the main point I want to make is, like, damn, that's crazy how far they're pushing that and how quickly they're doing it, how early in their development they're doing it. And just, like, seemingly maybe it doesn't take away as much as I thought it took away. I'll definitely take that point. But what I'm not convinced yet is that it is the lead domino. And I actually just doubt that. Just given my understanding of, like, other sports, like, given my personal experience, I highly doubt that. I'd be curious is, like, yeah, I guess every other strong climber's opinion there, but I like that you point to Adam Ondra in that same devil's advocate point.
I think that's well said, man. We've hashed this out a bunch, and I think that I have been swayed and actually changed some of my climbing around where when I pull on, it's about how do I do this move the best possible, and that I've shaped my climbing more and more to embrace that instead of more, how do I get stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. And I just, I don't want to go too into this because we often cover it, but just, there is this coveting of strength that I have, that I think a lot of us have. And, in some ways, I would argue that that is a mistake for some of the reasons you said, but also because what we really like seeing is strength applied, and that someone who's extremely strong, it just doesn't mean anything to us. And someone who is not strong at all and can't showcase anything, it doesn't mean anything to us either. Like, it's something about taking your abilities. It's like what's most impressive, I think we see this all the time, is when someone ekes out every last iota of strength and ability in a moment, and they climb perfectly, they're focused, they have the strength just barely to that threshold to do whatever climb or move we see. And that's a beautiful thing to see. So
Yeah.
I got.
Can I make one more point here?
Sure.
I feel like, because we're going to jump off this point, and, like, before we do, every time we talk about something controversial, like, Instagram comments go crazy. And just to protect that for once, I want to protect a point that, like, Josh and I make quite often. Like, we're definitely not saying that given the current results we are observing, like, yeah, there must be, like, I just don't want to, like, just hear results, see results in the news and be like, oh, Josh, it's so crazy, these guys must be so good and so strong. It's like, oh yeah, that's an observation. Like, what's it relative to given everything else we think about in climbing? And I think, like, the thing that I'm always curious about, and I'm not one to hear news or see news and instantly take a devil's advocate approach. That definitely doesn't happen. And in fact, most of the time, especially in the case of Noah and Adam, and Noah knows this, I've said it, I'm like, maybe I should be more like this. I'll what you kind of just said, and I'm like, well, but it kind of depends. Like, climbing is about, given your knowledge right now, like, what's the best, what you just said, what is the best I can operate right now, but what's also the best long-term approach I can have to be better, so the next time I run into the scenario that I can view it differently. All I know in climbing is for the first like 9 years, everything I walked up to, what maybe is because I was competing or because I tried things that were too hard for me, everything I walked up to was too hard for me. And so how I approached things that were too hard for me were, it couldn't just be answered by being stronger. It couldn't. And I, in fact, tried that. I tried to get stronger in some ways, went to the same exact, I was a repeat challenger. I would go to the same project over 7 years and I would get stronger and I would show up and still fail. And so it was proven to me that strength didn't really answer everything. It answered some things, but it didn't answer everything. And I think just to clarify this one point about why we're saying that, why I'm saying, and maybe Josh is agreeing here, that I don't think strength is the lead domino, just to answer that one point, is because of what Josh just said, which is it's just, I think people are kind of just wired. And maybe this is just something that people can take away from and listening to this episode or this part of the episode, which is like, how have you been taught your whole life to analyze progress? And strength is the easiest, the most straightforward place we rely on looking at progress, but it doesn't mean that's the best form of progress. And in fact, my accusation is even stronger than that, which is that it's not even the best remotely place to look at progress. Like, if you want to see ROI and low-hanging fruit in your progression in climbing, the first place a coach will look. And again, just to clarify an Instagram rage comment point, like I can't flash roster man, but I've coached enough people in my life to know that the first place I don't look is their strength. Actually, the first place I look at is their strength, to tell them that the strength is just way stronger than they think relative to their result. And so this is just coming from a lot of experience myself and also through coaching people, that like generally when we look at assessments though, like we want to look at everything beyond your strength. And generally people just immediately increase their ability to perform when they look at every other metric. But anyway, the real point there is that strength, just check how easy it is for you to rely on strength as a metric, as a progression point, right? Like, of course, but it feels so much better this way. It's like, well, maybe you should be looking at feeling as like how you're progressing in something. You should have a strong assessment, just observably, like what should I be getting better at?
Yeah, Tim, somehow you're able to utter things that the internet flips out on. The only reason why I joke and like that is because you're not doing it to have the internet flip out. You know, it's just you being you. But my little social media team that comes up with those reels, they just love. I feel like they're just like, Tim makes their life so easy to get those likes. Or actually, I shouldn't say likes. Somehow, likes and angry comments go hand in hand. Yeah,
Engagement.
it is interesting, that idea of, you know, when you go to a project and you get stronger and yet you can't do the climb. I actually had the interesting one there on Soul Slinger, where like the first time I ever tried Soul Slinger, which is this techie V9 in the buttermilks, and like the first year I tried it, where I had no business being on V9, I got actually like decently high up. I think I like grabbed the little crimp and maybe even kind of like got the pinch. Tried it for years, could not do it. One day I am injured. Like I had hurt my finger, my shoulder, and I wasn't really climbing, but I happened to be in the buttermilks. I I was drunk. I wasn't drunk. I had been drinking, and I just decided to try it, and I just did it with like zero effort. Like it was just the easiest thing in the world, but I had just tried it, like, you know, the year before, way stronger, sober, and without injuries, and I couldn't do it. And it just was like, oh well, dude, what the hell is going on there? And I still don't really know. But I also will tell you, Tim, there's some times I've gone back to projects, been way stronger, and just been like, oh, I'm just gonna lock this thing down and shake out, kiss my bicep, and then
Yeah.
grab the next hold, and that feels good too. So I know all sides. Okay.
Those 2 points. Sorry, just
Go
I
ahead.
have
Go
to
ahead.
feed back
Yeah,
those
yeah,
two
yeah.
last points because I feel also like we're just like shitting on Adam Shahar in some way, and that's not what I want to get across. And one other point that I want to clarify, just given you reminded me of you kind of sharing that sentiment, because I've had the same type of stuff. Like I've sent long term projects, literally drunk or like injured or something sick, like because you take so much emphasis away from like of course. But one thing's for sure, one comment I have to make before we jump off this point, or if we do, can you be one of the best climbers in the world without being remotely as strong as Adam Shahar? Probably not. Like one thing's for sure, yeah, you probably do, given you probably have to be as strong as Adam Shahar because it's proven to be possible. Of course you got to get there. But my only point there being that Is that going to be the sole reason you climb that difficulty? Almost certainly not. I think I've seen people as strong as Adam Shahar. It's just really hard to tell that they're also good, because every time I see someone as strong, they're just definitely not as good. So he's very good.
Thank you. That was a good full circle. And yeah, I don't think Adam would think that we were saying anything negative about him. And the other couple of things I wanted to say about these young guys and doing these climbs, like when Adam, I literally watched him like, I don't know, like mess up his skin on Lucid, or like, I don't know, he had like tried it a few times and it was just like, I need to go like do something else. Or like, I don't know. He's just like, I'm going to leave this for another day. Ran around the corner and did direct north, which is a V14 on Grandma Peabody first try. And the thing that I want to make sure that we also say is that Adam said, like, he was like, oh, I tried so hard and I like kind of bumbled that magnetic north move. And it's not like he's just walking up and he's super strong and everything's easy. Like, Adam is putting it all out there, and that's what it took to get strong. And he is really strong. I really like that you also said, hey, like, we're saying all these things, but if you want to be the best climber in the world, you probably do need to be as strong as Adam Shahar.
Yeah.
And on that note, I want to share one more little anecdote that I heard. I'm not going to name names because I didn't get the thumbs up to say this, but someone I know who has climbed up to V15 tested some finger strength, like just did some finger strength testing. And yeah, I don't know what they did. And so, and just like we're saying, always take this with a grain of salt, because what does that really say? Like, you could have unbelievably strong fingers and still not climb hard. But, you know, just like you're saying, maybe you should have as strong fingers as Shahar and Noah Wheeler and be able to move like Adam Ondra, blah, blah, blah. Have the mentality on Highballs as young Timothy Kang. And he said that he tested his fingers, Mr. and Mr. Noah Wheeler.
Sorry, who? Oh, this other person.
So a V15 climber, I'm going to say probably has pretty strong fingers. He doesn't have weak fingers.
Okay.
His fingers were X amount less than who has very strong fingers. And then that same difference between him and was the same gap between and Noah. So,
And Noah's even stronger than.
yeah, to the
Yeah.
same
Okay.
notch.
Okay.
And so it's just, I brought it up because it goes to that point of, you know, maybe the key to being the best climber in the world isn't just to be on the boards. And I don't know if Adam in 10 years will also say that. Maybe he will. It'll be interesting to see. But we do know that you still, if you want to be out there just crushing V17 after V17 after V17, you probably do want the finger strength of a Noah Wheeler.
Yeah. It's pretty absurd. I'm not gonna open my mouth, dude. I have so many thoughts on this point. But hey, go Adam Shahar and Noah Wheeler and Zach and Brian and all the people in the Whaleys. Go, you guys! You guys are crushing. None of my points. I love you guys. You guys are awesome. I'm super inspired. I really hope that. But that's just where my brain goes. You know, like. Sorry, one last point here because it's on the same point, but, you know, slightly different topic. I've been thinking about this a ton because, like, not that many people think about this stuff with me, but I've been thinking about it a ton. The delta in mental head game between, like, me and, like, a lot of my generation, I feel like is a noticeable delta when it comes to, like, highballing. The delta between me and Honnold, given my experience and, like, what I know about Honnold and, like, what I know about free soloing and stuff, is absurd. And so my point there being that the mental gap in climbing also is, like, not even remotely touched, Josh. Like, and I didn't even spend that much time trying to fix it or, like, really work on it. I just found it curious. Like, I want to make it very, like, abundantly clear. I never really trained for highballing. Like, never really went out, like, training for highballing. If you frame training as the same as, like, these guys are, first of all, they're just board climbing every session. So it's some sessions not even training. Some sessions they're cool down sessions, like going to try direct north. Like, you know, all their sessions are on, like, boards, right? That's train, and then they're training on the boards as well, and, like, hangboard or, like, whatever. If you take that same approach to training the mental side or technical side, like, most people don't go either of these two directions. And even with that, we've seen the level. But Honnold used to do, like, it's come out in some interviews or, like, maybe his book or something, but he's done a significant amount of ropeless laps. So his understanding of climbing perfectly and masterfully on certain type of movement, of course, like, I would say his language and mental game it only scales to the physical output you can put. So like as the physical climbing gets harder and harder for him, maybe he has a significant drop off, or maybe it reaches really high. I have no idea. I haven't really had too many conversations with him. My real point there being like, look, I think there's so many directions to go in how we can improve in climbing and movement and mental space. And yes, what we're learning in 2025 is just like how absurd you could push this one metric of like in bouldering. But man, headspace climbing, I just want to make this clear. This is how I look at things. Like, dude, we're not even remotely close to studying the training side of mental headspace and climbing.
Damn it, Tim! That's such a perfect segue into asking about that project in Bishop. But you also reminded me. I just before we go there, the two things I want to say is, first of all, you listed out just a bunch of these young guys who are doing really well. And I also want to just say and put this out there that they are great guys. Like they are just cool,
They're cool.
fun. They're not like too cool. They're or yeah, they're cool. They're not too cool. They're out there just having fun. Just good vibes around those guys. I just want to put that out there because they are fun to be around. I really got a chance to know them a little better and really enjoyed their vibe. The last thing you made me think of when you talked about this whole pushing these things, these next levels, we will come back to Bishop, mental game, highballing, is I was really stunned, as it seems like even guys like Carlo were, with this level of ability that we're seeing. I know it's in this narrow style, but it's, hard bouldering style. I mean, it's definitely something that a discipline and niche that is highly sought after and well known. And it was kind of like, oh, okay, there's another notch. And I guess the thing I want to put out there is that it makes me think like, so are we going to be talking about, some kid who has the same delta and finger strength above Noah Wheeler as Noah did above like where are we seeing like the limits of ability? And I know you were just saying how, hey, look, we can expand our abilities in climbing outside just the physical realm. And if we do, and if they do, are we going to see V18, V19, V20? Like, I guess this is a big deal to me because I felt like here's what it is, man. Felt like I knew climbing. I did it for a long time. I Tim, you're laughing. Give it just stop. I was trying to be serious. Tim, I felt like I knew climbing. I've been doing it for a long time. I would climb with guys like Carlo, and I'd be like, okay, I see what they're doing. Like, I get it. I can't quite do it. I'm good. I'm not great. And now I'm just like, oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. Like these guys, Adam, I'm like, oh, there's another level. And then so I can't help but be like, well, maybe I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about at all. And maybe there's, maybe Noah's kid is going to be climbing V23 and it's something that just is so out there in my mind that, do you think that we're going to keep on seeing this not acceleration, this consistent linear progress in difficulty, however you want to say it, in V grades, we'll just say?
No, probably not. A couple of points there that I think are really strong. I think very like agreeable. I had a couple of thoughts in the same place where I'm like, dang, like, yeah, I really don't. But then I think the natural thing, which is like, well, how'd that happen? And how are you going to test it in the long term? Because I think it's curious to look at a couple of different things. Like one thing that's curious is, yeah, what's the limit? What's the physical limit your body can, a human body can manage? And we all know that like when we do get to that limit, there's going to be a couple in the top like 100 physical bodies of rock climbing. There's going to be a couple outliers there that are going to be really interesting, but I have a feeling we're pretty close to like the top 100 if is the big given, and this is more to your personal point. It's like if all of those people have a similar way of getting to that level. What you are limited in knowing was in your time climbing, Josh, like how much did you guys actually train rock climbing, bouldering, to send lucid dreaming? You didn't train that.
What's
you
training?
Trained to have right. You trained to have a better session the next time you went onto the board so that you were just slightly better than the person right in front of you. You didn't have the ability. I don't know if that's a major accusation, but that's how I used to train. Because climbing was a much more tight world. The usage of Instagram, social media, all sorts of you can compare very easily, very quickly at like 9 years old. Your dad and your mom can be like, all right, kiddo, this is the level. Like, this is what I believe. Like, there's a bunch of just like, let's throw whatever at the wall and see what sticks. Sure, that approach is kind of still there to some degree, but like what you know is the metric of possible is just like is way higher. So I think that's a given. But also, like, these people, like you're saying, have had access to that training. That's just a given. And so eventually, I think we'll see the method of getting to a person's physical limit will kind of even out in terms of access to a lot of people. I think a lot more people will be able to see that. The reason why I think that limit is kind of getting reached is because at least in the way that I'm looking at it, the results of hard climbing though haven't been pushed that far. Like, what I'm really curious about is like, what's the hardest bouldering grade now? Now that we see what the physical capabilities seemingly are kind of like. Now I think I could even have like a very quick assessment of like Adam Shahar and Noah and their physical capabilities. Like, just watching Noah climb, for example, like, yes, he may have some of the strongest fingers in the world, but specifically in half crimp. Like, he'll tell you even that he like pretty much never full crimps and he pretty much never open hands. And he's significantly weaker in those two grips. But what do those two grips offer in movement ability? A ton, right? What does that actually offer? Okay, maybe not power, but efficiency. And in order to climb something at your limit, it can't just be power. To climb a hard boulder problem of 2 moves, yes, you just need to be very strong. But to climb hard boulders in general, hard movements in climbing, like, you need a lot of everything. But I think, yeah, my point there being that I think in so far what we've seen, really good climbers who are definitely very strong, but not nearly as strong, I think, as like Adam and Noah, they're still climbing really hard. And arguably, like, what I'd be really curious to see is if you put Noah and Adam, of course, through some aimed training, at all of the hardest climbs in the world, how would they fare? And I don't think they're going to cruise all of them. It's just really cool that we saw Adam flash Rostaman. But will he go and do Alphane? I have no idea. I don't think so. I would need to go and see that. I don't really doubt he wouldn't, but then how many levels past
I'll take
that?
that
Like,
bet, Tim. I'll take that bet.
I'll
dude.
take that bet too.
Yeah.
I'll happily take that bet.
I think you'll do
man.
Alphane, dude. I'll put $100 on it whenever Adam goes to try Alphane, he'll do Alphane. Now I'll put $100 on that.
My bet, obviously he'll do Alphane. My bet's more so like, if I was to make a bet, because I'm not going to make one right now because I have to like structure the terms of it. But I think the bet that I'd be curious on is just like, can we pick a threshold that determines his assessment of the difficulty? My assessment of what I think he's going to assess the difficulty is going to be shocking compared to how hard he thought Rostaman was. My point being, I think he's going to think Alphane might be close in the level of interpretation, but I think he's going to realize afterward how much harder it is, because he's probably, my guess is that he's just so good at what he's good at that Alphane will have to test certain things. And I think this has been shown countless times. I think a lot of really, really, really strong climbers go to try Alphane and can't do it. The only people who are doing Alphane, for example, are really good power endurance climbers. And they're really strong boulders, but primarily they're really good power endurance climbers. Anyway, my point here being, I think the level that we're looking at in bouldering, like we've just discussed, is like probably being pushed. I don't know. There has to be a lot more research into like what your physical body can maintain. That research is done probably in a lot of other sports that are way more straightforward outputs.
Okay, well, so I kind of heard you say that you don't think that there's going to be crazy gains over the next, 10, 20, 30 years.
In physical metrics.
In physical metrics. Okay, throwing that aside, do you think that there will be, like, will there ever be a V19? Will there ever be a V18? Will there ever be a V19? Will there be a V20?
Okay, actually, there's 2 different points here. No, because I think, to Nathaniel's point, the grades will adjust more accordingly to like what you're actually looking for. So what will that do to the whole grading metric system? I have no idea. Like, I've tried V9s that I think are way harder than like many V13s I've done. Way harder. And so eventually I think those grades will be even. Like, I just think it'll be an interpretation of how difficult climbing is, given how much it tests you physically, mentally, and technically. That's what I think grades will represent. Now, I think that if you look at how physically, mentally, and technically difficult the hardest graded climbs in the world are right now, how many grades above that will exist? A couple. I think a couple. Like, I think you can test, but that is a given. What you'd have to also understand is like, which is very speculative guess, is like, are the people who are at the best technical level, the best physical level, and the best mental level, are they ever going to be interested to even out? Like, does Sriracha ever care about highballing? Does Adam Shahar ever care about highballing? And what are things missing from that they will never have if they never do it? And vice versa for like sport climbing. Like, will Seb ever be able to boulder V15 or harder? Like, what is he missing from that in his sport climbing? If he was to, but that's more a matter of choice than it is a matter of capability, right? Capability wise, I absolutely believe there's a couple of levels, but that's contingent on these people who are capable to do the other things that experience, like historically, they haven't chosen to do.
Yeah, here's the thing that I just find really interesting is, okay, I remember you talking about Shaolin before it got done by Sean. I remember you looking, because I mean, it was a known project and you were like, I don't know, there's holds there. It's not that crazy. And then like Noah goes up, he just released that wheel rock and he's like, kind of like does the moves really quick. Like clearly it's not that hard for him. Sorry. It is very hard for him and he hasn't done it yet at the time of this taping. But this is kind of how I felt, where I would like see stuff, maybe it'd be a little bit beyond me. Like, I don't know. I mean, you're strong, Tim. I don't know if you're going to go do Shaolin this season. I wouldn't put it past you
Probably
doing
not.
Shaolin though. Like, cause you're like, I get it, right? You're like, there's holds. It makes sense.
Yeah, now I get it.
So that's where I was. And you're like, okay, I can see what they're doing, but, I got surprised and shit changed where like,
I get your point.
If Noah walks up and he's like, kind of just like, I mean, I don't know if that was his first session, but like clearly that wasn't the hardest thing that Noah could do. And to your point, I don't think Noah is a complete climber because no one's a complete climber at 20. Like even if you climb since 10,
sure.
Yeah. And so that's where I'm like, it's just fun. And look, we can have all these arguments about what is V17 compared to V16? What are V grids? But the truth is what's going to happen is that we're going to continue with the scale and it's arbitrary and weird and subjective, but someone's going to propose a V18 at some point and the community is either going to be like, yeah, dude, that was fucking hard. Or they're going to say, nah, dude, that is not that hard. I went up and had a session. So that's where I'm at,
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a couple interesting points there, but one thing, because this conversation just should be brought up again in like a year, because I think we're just gonna have so much more like points to be able to talk about. But one thing is in my mind is for sure is that as grades go on, as more hard limit, quote unquote, limit climbs get done for that individual and they propose a grade, what I feel for sure is that there are going to be more disagreements from the highest level of climbers. And I think, like, for example, like Noah, I watched him do Trieste as like kind of his warm up for Shaolin, but I kind of had to teach him how to do the top out because it's a highball. It's a little bit scary, but for me, that's like a level 1 out of 10 highball. Like I just did it casually in the warm up, just trying the top out, just to show Noah how to do this top out. When he got up there, he like freaked out. Not in a bad way. I'm really not.
Dude, you're gonna get another text from Noah after this goes live. Like,
I know.
What the fuck, dog?
You're just. I was like helping him.
Yeah, but you're just throwing me under the bus on the pod.
I know. But I can only do that because because I praise Noah so much. So Noah, take this one. Because this is painting my point, which is like his interpretation of the difficult part of the climb it was based on that. And I think, yes, those are two very distinct types of climbing. Like one's just more about fear, but what does fear do to you? Like, okay, for example, like, have you guys ever tried to do a foot rock on the top of a lead wall? Like, what are you scared of? Like, there's no actual danger, but like, it's really hard for me to do that when I'm slightly scared or slightly pumped. Now imagine just taking the rope off entirely. Get to the top of your 40-foot lead wall, do this foot rock that you've like pumped out, chalked up too many times, just not committed to this like kind of straightforward move, well under your physical capability and technical capability, and you somehow are not committing to it. Now take the rope off. Are you ever going to do it? Like, I think there's so many interesting things. Like I'm saying, I know I'm iterating, but that's the only point that I know. I only know the mental side of climbing, like at a strong degree. And it's interesting to me what that does to you as a climber and what it can do for you as a climber as you improve at it. And so what I think will happen for sure is that I like one point we were making before is like, well, who's the perfect climber who has the strongest mental, physical, and technical? It's like, okay, maybe you and I can agree that maybe that won't happen. And if that was to happen, yeah, then bouldering and sport climbing grades, trad grades, free solo grades will all go way up. But that's actually probably what's not going to happen. What's probably going to happen is way more people are going to be way better in their little aspects. And what definitely will happen with that, just to clean up my point here, is that all different of these sects of climbers and the climbers who are leading those fields in climbing, they'll do a climb. And I will probably try the same climb that somebody else in a way different style will do the same climb. And our interpretation of the difficulty of that climb will probably be like on opposite ends of the spectrum. And this has been proven to me multiple times. This is the biggest thing I've learned in the last couple of years of trying some hard climbs. Is I'm like, I just disagree. But I'm also shocked like how easy some people think some things are. Right. But I definitely am like, are you serious? You thought that was this great? Like, that's crazy to me.
Okay, that makes sense. What I hear you saying is just as we get to higher and higher grades and people have specialized more and more through whatever reason, although I would argue that the era of boards is not done. It's like accelerating.
Right.
And so we're going to
That's
see
true, too.
even more of that, like bear down, steep, small holds,
That's
big
such an
jumping.
interesting point.
Right. Like, don't you think we're going to see more of that? So
The training tools in general, yeah, are gonna
correct.
change.
And so, but then, I hear what you're saying, where I do think that there's going to be more discrepancy because you're going to have people. And actually, we even saw some of that where, like, when Daniel did Hypnotize Minds and it was aptly named, it kind of blew people away. It was actually, I think that's his best name, by the way, of a boulder. I feel, I don't know all his FAs, but I really like that one. And I like that tattoo he got on his hand of it. It's like that skeleton with like have you not seen that, dude?
Totally forgot.
With
No,
like
I've seen it. Yeah, I totally
the
forgot
watch.
that
I
was
don't know.
the.
Anyways, them and dude, I mean, it doesn't get done. Matt Foltz has done it. Plenty of people have tried. Ask Dave Graham. He famously tried it for many, 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 many seasons. And then Rustam Galmanov, at 115 pounds, smoking 2 cartons of crappy Russian cigarettes a day, like walks up and just crushes it, dude. Just like, I think he was here for a World Cup and he just like did it. And that's not exactly, I mean, I was kind of backhanding, being a dick. It's actually not to take much away from, because dude, he's incredible. I mean, he was a winner in World Cup series. He's probably, most people listening don't know who he is. Damn good climber. But that was a style that he really excelled at. And so he could have come along and been like V14, I don't know, V13. And then like the rest of us are like, quickly. Yeah, I think he did a few sessions. Like, I mean, I think he was not here. That was not an era where he was flying to do Hypnotized Minds. He was just here for a World Cup. Dude, okay, we really need to get off this. I'm just going to toss this out and we'll see if you want to sink your teeth into it. But one discussion that I've had, this was with more of an old head, was just this argument that the sport climbs are fundamentally, the top end of sport climbing is fundamentally harder than the top end of bouldering. And, I kind of live in a bouldering world. I don't know, California, honestly, United States, bouldering. Like, we boulder, at least in this era, maybe not the era before, but we're boulders. And so we always think we're cool because we're strong and we can do hard moves, and you put us on some hard route and we're like, yo, you call this is a crimp? Like, this is a jug, dude. And so I feel like there's something that maybe it's, again, this coveting of strength. We've kind of denigrated sport climbing and their achievements in some ways. And we don't really understand what Almondra is doing on something like silence. And this guy I was talking to is just kind of like, look at how long it takes to do 15D. Look at the time that these guys are putting in to dial in every little detail of everything. And he's like, these guys are unbelievably strong climbers. They're V17 boulders. And then it takes a lifetime to develop that kind of endurance, just that physicality, as well as movement efficiency and technique. And, you're someone who does sport climb at a high level. And, it's just, it's an interesting thing to me. Like, these V17s are getting done sometimes very quickly compared to, look at, is it Stefano on silence? I mean, Stefano is an incredible climber, dude. And
super good sport climber.
Yeah. So it's just, I don't know if we should dive into that. That's just like,
I would love to have a couple quick thoughts. I have to. Yeah. Cause I'm being a sport climber, like, dude. We talk too much about bouldering, man. Okay. just a couple points to like, I'm sure people feel this, but also like, think about how many millions of climbers there are, even in the US alone, right? Or whoever our audience is. Like, think about how many climbers there are in your wherever your local area is. How many of them boulder and how many of the sport climb? How many of them are more interested in bouldering? Like, we're just gonna know more about bouldering. It's just more accessible for a lot of people. It's just more fun, right? Would you, if you never were into running, you think you're more likely, as a kid, more likely to get into a marathon type running or a sprint? Most people are catered towards sprinting. What's simpler to train? Simpler power and strength or endurance? Endurance is far simpler. You just do a lot of it, right? And so, but how much endurance do you have to do to see gains that apply? That's really complex, right? But the complexity of power training is like, that's what we start talking about. Like, how did Adam be so, like, no, that's super complex, I think, to like really, I don't think we really understand the complexity that it takes to get to Adam Shahar level. I think Adam probably couldn't even go in hindsight and be like, this is exactly what I did. And this is what I would coach a bunch of these young, like, I don't think Adam can confidently, I would be super curious to know. But if I gave him 10 5-year-olds and was like, all right, Adam, how confidently could you turn them into you? All of them. All of them. Like, gave him 10 5-year-olds and said, all of them have to be on. But that's like if I said all of them need to be climbing 514 or 515. Like, that just seems to me a lot more like, all right, yeah, we could do that. Like, that seems more doable. Obviously, I think it's major speculations, but point there being that endurance, I think, is simpler. So, like, what we're seeing in terms of limit, if people are climbing as hard as they are, and like, you could just throw like any of us strong boulderers onto like a 515A, like, we're smacked around. I mean, Kai Leitner and Ben Hanna have been trying Jumbo Love, trying multiple trips. And like, I don't know how their progression is on it, but they haven't sent it yet. And they're really strong boulderers, like super strong. And they're both incredible sport climbers from my generation. Probably some of the best other than like Drew Ruana. And so, yeah, I also have been, I kind of mentioned this earlier, like Seb doing Supreme Jumbo. I don't think anyone knows how much harder Supreme Jumbo is than Jumbo, but I also don't think most people know how much harder Jumbo Love is than the things that are in their gym. Whereas you can kind of go literally try Lucid, touch it, and be like, oh, I know how much harder that is than like every hard boulder at my gym. And like, that just helps like understand the level. I would speculate that Supreme Jumbo is just like way harder than people even think is harder than the climbs at their gym. I think the complexity of efficiency, like power endurance output, doing power endurance output, doing like a 3 V8 boulder stacked on top of each other after you do 100 feet of 15A, I think that's extremely hard math. I've just spent way more time trying like a particular sport climbing route than like every other hard boulder I've done. And it was just so much harder mentally to get that climb actually done and clip the chains. To clip the chains on like the hardest sport climb I've done just took so much more dedication and work and solving, like actual mental solving. I didn't sit in my car or like sit in the tent or like write notebooks about me sending Spectre, even though it took me 1,000 tries. I just assumed some things need to get better and I would still keep throwing things at it. I literally fell on the last 5 moves of Bad Girls Club 15 times in a row, like literally didn't fall in any other move and was just like, dang, how do I do this thing? Jimmy Webb, I had a conversation with him. He had done like several other hard 514 climbs, went to Bad Girls Club, and he was like, yeah, it's kind of crazy. I've been falling the last draw like multiple times. I don't even get there pumped anymore. I'm like, so what is that? Like, what is that? Why are you falling there? Like, that's kind of crazy to me. So to that point, like about marathons and stuff compared to like sprints. Now, one other point that I want to make to round that out, I'm not saying that sprinting isn't as hard as marathon running is. I have no idea. Those are just two different tests. Like, we could look at in the Olympics of like all sorts of other sports, endurance versus strength output or power versus endurance output. I think they're just two different things that you're testing. But to your point, no, I don't. I think sport climbing. Okay, here's one thing that I've thought about that kind of paints my point. If I was to design a competition, one thing's for sure is that bouldering wouldn't look how it looks today, and we're not going to get into that conversation, but it would look a lot more like what boulders do outside. Honestly, it would just be like really hard displays of climbing movement. But even compared to what I see in sport climbing outside, that's not how I would design a sport climbing competition. I think it would be amazing to watch like just literally how far people can go in climbing, like on a bunch of really difficult moves. Like, first of all, what I would want to study is like, what's the hardest movement most strong boulders can sustain for like over 100 times? Because it's probably not V15. Like, I'm not gonna challenge a climber to climb over 100 feet of V15, but watching somebody climb 800 feet of V8 would be pretty damn interesting to me, and the separation there.
I guess the question really boils down to, is 9C Wait, is Silence and Big 9C or are they 9C plus? They're 9C,
Oh,
right?
I don't know the high end sport
I think it's
rating version.
9C. Okay, we'll say is 15D harder or easier than V17? And I think just
Harder.
instantly you got to point out that only Seb on DNA, Adam on Silence, and Jakob Schubert on Project Big, or I guess it's Big, whatever, have done 15D. So yeah, is it 9C or is it 9C plus?
It's 9C. Yeah,
9C. Okay.
15D is 9C. But also, I want to, sorry, devil's advocate here. Like, just again, the number of people doing that, even though this is like fighting my point, the number of people is not what we should be looking at because that's just a function of how many people are actually trying it. The percentage is actually pretty high. Like the percentage of people actually trying hard 515 and the people doing 15D, that actually totally negates my point. Because the percentage is way higher than the amount of people trying V15 boulders and the amount of people actually doing V15 boulders is much, it's a much further ratio. But the types of climbers in that group of people trying 515s, how studied they are in efficiency, how much experience they have, how old they are, and how much climbing they have done, and the success that they're pushing is absolutely mind-blowing to me. Like I don't know, for me, even right now, sorry, last point I'm gonna make on just what your question is here. Like if I watch YouTube, the most interesting YouTube content to me is Alex Mego's content and like on Adam Ondra content. And honestly, lately it's been kind of Seb content because they test to me like what seems really difficult to test in rock climbing. So that kind of like paints the point to me.
I'm secretly like Seb is my favorite climber in general. I
He's
don't know what it
crazy,
is. I
man.
just love I love the climbs that he chooses to do. I think, dude, those images of the Ramelroll cave when they got that, well, the real rock footage is good, but also when Andra and Schubert went out there to try it, those drone shots, the Ramelroll cave in Verdun Gorge just looks
Oh, the Verdun is
on. Oh my
crazy,
god,
dude.
definitely high on my lifetime tick list. Okay, okay, Tim. So we're gonna move on like 8 times. Okay, topic one was Noah is a savage. I feel like we got through that. I feel like we fully fleshed that one out, and the answer is yes. The answer is yes. Um, topic two is that you did go out to Bishop recently, and Tim, you do like highballs, and you like well, that's just like a very blanket statement. You seem to like beautiful, tall climbs in Bishop, especially, and there's a lot of them. And I know that you were inspecting something, perhaps a future project. And Tim, honestly, I mean, you've been around a lot. You've made your name in a bunch of different ways, but a lot of people probably do know you from the Testpiece podcast. Now, that was a total joke and then came out.
It's actually true.
But how? No, but that was supposed to be a joke. But then I was like, damn, that kind of just sounds like a dick thing to say. What I was going to say is that people know you from your film Focus, which chronicled you doing 5 of the Bishop Buttermilk Highballs, kind of the classics. And you did them all in a day, which was insane because any of those would seriously be a lifetime achievement. I mean, I used to get mocked because I was so proud of my send of Evolution, which is like
Super proud.
the easiest way up Grandpa Peabody, basically. And that was a big deal for me, but that was kind of like the last one you did of the day as kind of like an easy one that's like not dangerous. You're like, dude, I mean, I might like roll an ankle or break a leg, but I'm not gonna die or anything, dude.
Right.
Um, and for me, the scariest or the most serious one that you did was too big to flail, too big to flail. I don't know why I can never get that right. And you have talked about going out there and looking at other ones, and so I'm curious what you were looking at. I'm also curious about how highballing fits into your life now that you're a bit older. I mean, even just that, but you have a lot of other things going on in life than climbing. And how does it fit into your mentality now? And what's the one that you're maybe looking at?
Ooh, that's a lot. First point is Josh, you're really good at podcasting. Your way of like setting out the stage, because like I knew we were going to talk about this, so I was just like ready to jump in. I'm excited to talk about it, but like my brain right now is so chaotic, so I would just like talk about it. But that's a much cleaner way. Shout out if you guys listen to Testpiece. Josh runs a good show. Also, just
Thanks,
another
dude.
quick one. Like people do like more often than anything else recognize me from Testpiece. So shout out to you guys if you guys know me from here. But I'm just a guest, man. I'm just super psyched to help Josh out. But
Also, I just want to say that well, I'll speak for myself and maybe I'll speak for you, is that people do come up and tell me that they listen to the show and that they're fans. And I always appreciate it. I do have these, there was a few times I feel like I was in Bishop, I was like hurting my kids. And I think someone like yelled to me like, oh, I'm a big fan. I think someone said something to me. I like turned around, but I wasn't sure. And so if that was you, I apologize. I never want to like snub someone that, you know, is supporting me. And I just, yeah, I appreciate when you guys do come up to me, and maybe Tim does, but maybe not if he's, you know, 40 feet up the wall. Let him climb his highball.
no, yeah, no, it's super cool that the climbing world is like, it always shocks me how many people actually, I mean, you know, it's, I don't think, I love our episodes, but I never really tapped into that. And there was always a lot of people, way more people recognize me from that than anything else that I've done. So
dude, Focus has like 150,000 views or something. That's a dope film. Yeah.
I know. Yeah. Focus obviously came from me. This came from us, and like Focus is something I'm proud of. But yeah, y'all should watch Focus if you haven't.
Linked in the show notes for sure. Okay.
Linked in the show notes.
That's the line. Yeah. So Focus was a big high point of your career. It definitely, dude, I will again shill the podcast we did. I think it was called Tim's Best Day. I want to say off the top of my head, it was in the 20s. I'll link that in the show notes too. One of my favorite episodes of all time because of just the behind the scenes, the rawness of what it was like for you or what you shared with us. And, you know, I know that's still something that you enjoy, but you are older now. Things are different. And yeah, tell us what goes through your head now. Why are you still out there doing it?
Yeah, actually, so a couple interesting points before I talk about this project. Bishop for me had like, when I was climbing in Bishop a ton, I had climbed basically I hadn't missed a year in Bishop until last year. So this trip that I went 2 weeks ago was like the first time going back since Focus. So it was a very emotional trip for me. I took one of these kids, Will Hines, who's a kid that I've been coaching for a couple of years. It's actually the only kid I coach now. But he's been coming to Red Rocks a couple of times because he's just psyched and like, you know, always, he's the only kid that I coach because he's just such an aggressive student. We'll say that. Will's awesome. We love Will, but he had never been to Bishop before. And he actually is the only person that I've coached or like really worked with entirely that's expressed highballing interests. So like, damn it. It's actually just really hard for me, to be honest. But of course I'll support him. That's why it's hard. But no, he didn't like go and hurt himself or anything. Luckily he split his first night in Bishop, so I didn't really get to test how scary it would be to watch him up a highball. But no, obviously it was a bummer. But yeah, so we went just for like 2 nights. It was really nice. Obviously got to run into the energy, and my point in bringing that up was this was kind of the first time I got to like assess the assessment of other strong climbers going to Bishop. Like I know a lot of people who've been going to Bishop for a long time, but everyone knows who's been going to Bishop for a long time, like how difficult it is in the ways that it's difficult. And yeah, like these guys are crushing these test pieces, but also at the same time, like not that many of them did any highballs, like any serious highballs. Kai did a little life, which is awesome. But again, Kai's been climbing in Bishop for a long time. So he's not part of that group, someone that I consider like coming to Bishop and like testing himself and just like smashing it up. And I thought that was really cool representation from that whole group that like he's you know, pushing the highballing a little bit. But I also didn't realize that a little life is like, if you're looking at Too Big to Flail, it's like up on the hill, like way up there. I saw them like hanging out on the rope and just like up there on the hillside, but it's up by the Swarm and Too Big to Flail. But yeah, another thing that you were saying, the Tim's Best Day episode was really cool for me to do because something I didn't think got captured in the film much was like what that day felt like. I thought it was a beautiful, very well edited and like awesome showcasing of the project. But the project was like a day of 10 years of highballing experience for me in a particular area, and just came with a lot of background, and my feeling on each of these climbs just came with a lot of depth. And that is for linking up 5 highballs that I had already done in a singular day, which is a very specific type of test. And the reason why I bring up all that context is because, like, honestly, I wasn't sure I was gonna. Actually, I was pretty damn sure. You can ask Brennan. I was pretty damn sure after I did Too Big to Flail for the first time that was gonna be it. And then so when I brought up focus, Brennan was like, dude, what the heck are you talking about? Like, that's too much. And even for me, I was like, yeah, it sucks to have interest in these things that are potentially dangerous. You put a lot of your, risk in the hands of others. And that responsibility comes with a ton of stress and a ton of like conversations that people do not want to have. And a lot of thoughts I do not want to have. Like, one thing hasn't changed, Josh, since I was still forever. I don't want to die. I'm just like, I understand the consequence of like potentially taking the rope off and climbing 50 feet. Like, you could die as one of the potential outcomes of uh fucking up, right? Like, and you just have to be a lot more careful about like what actually happens if you do fuck up, right? And like, sorry, I'm gonna try. I try not to cuss in that way, but like, swear words come out when things are way more intense, right? I think that's really where my mind goes for this stuff. Um, I had been honestly, in some ways, like hesitant to try this project because I knew I would get psyched on it and I knew how hard it was. I knew about this project because at some point, Dan Beal, I think, is really the best highballer in the world. I think there's a huge difference between free soloing and highballing. I think free soloing is, would be considered to most people. I think a lot of these bishop highballs that we do are considered free solos, but because I know the scale of free soloing that goes up to like thousands of feet, and I've done at this point, I've only done one I would consider a real free solo, and it scared me a lot. But it was also like so much easier than all the climbing I've done, and like how it was scary really opened my eyes up to how different free soloing is. But in the world of highballing, Dan Beal, I think, is absolutely the best highballer in the world. And I had a conversation with him. I used to have a lot more conversations than I would just run into him in Bishop. But Dan, I hope you're doing great out there. Love you. But one conversation I had with him was about just like potential projects in Bishop, and this Too Big to Flail face came up as like, oh, there's a couple of lines on that face that have not been done. Ropeless, and he talked to me about the one absolutely direct line. It goes straight up the middle. Too Big to Flail is really like just a totally dug in boulder. Like, probably the whole boulder is like, probably someone knows this better than me, like 70, 80 feet tall. But, the face that you climb on Too Big sticks out for like 55, 50 feet or so, right? But also, like, the landing is like what creates the height of the climb. And that landing goes down really deep. It has to be built and stuff. But anyway, I think this boulder, when I first did Too Big to Flail, like, same as Trieste, I questioned like, how pure is this line? Like, how direct is this line? When I did Too Big to Flail the first time, the beta that I chose even sprouted too far left for what I thought the line was. And then when I redid Too Big to Flail for focus, I cleaned up the line. I did much harder movement, in my opinion, to just go more direct. And I still was not very satisfied with like, this bouldering face has to be the coolest highball in the world so far of what I've seen, even personally or in documented images. Like, this is one of the most perfect faces in one of the most beautiful landscapes on the planet. And this line that goes from this obvious jug, like, dude, the boulder has like luminance on the side, has some rope lines on the left side, it has another highball on the other side, it's got this Too Big to Flail. If you walk up to, like, actually the first time I ever went to this area where like Swarm is and where Luminance is, I had done Luminance, topped it out, looked over the edge, and I was like, and Dan Beal took us out there, and I was like, Dan, what's this line? And he was like, that's Too Big to Flail. I had watched Too Big to Flail like on YouTube like several times, and I was like, this is Too Big to Flail, this is crazy. And I had already said that one day I wanted to do it. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do it anymore. This face is insane. Like, you look straight down a drywall. You can't see a single hold. Like, especially if nothing's chalked up. Like, even when I wrapped down this project line when I was just there, I couldn't see any of the holds until I got to the bottom and started chalking things up. Like, the way that you climb on it, like, if it's really hard to explain this stuff. And really the thing I'm trying to get at, other than explaining a lot of this context, is like, you never know how hard highballing is until you go and try it yourself. And definitely every time I've gone onto a highball, I doubt if I'm going to actually end up doing it, even though I commit to wanting to do it. And yeah, the first time I went to this Too Big to Flail face, like I said, or when I did it, starts on this obvious jug. You have these two large boulders, like human-sized boulders, that lead you to this perfect jug directly in the middle of this perfect face. And then you start climbing left, just directly left to go up Too Big to Flail, and you top out the left side of this boulder. It's like perfectly set up for you to do this project that just goes straight up. And then finally wrap down this line. Brennan was there and he filmed some of the movements. I couldn't even do any of the bouldering moves on the bottom. Granted, I was like pretty out of bishop shape, which if you've climbed in bishop, you like really need to be in skin shape there. You got to, not be in pain all the time, which takes some time. And you got to get used to stepping on the feet. And so I've been, really out of it, been injured, like been focused on other life things, like you said, climbing other things. So, really out of the lingo of bishop movement. So I couldn't do a lot of the moves. I didn't really try, but I really wanted to see how the top half of the climb, because that's really like, even if you fall like on the bottom half, even 25 feet, like you'll really be fine. It's more a matter of like, given the style of the upper climbing, like, do you ever consider taking the rope off? Well, my conversation with Dan when we were talking about this project, he was like, oh, it's like 14B. Like if you grade 13D for too big to flail, which granted it's a slab, it's like probably like negative. It really looks like vert, but if you check it, it's like -1 or 2. It looks like I haven't measured it, but like it looks and feels like vert, but it actually is a slab. And when you start grading slab, boulder, or rope grade, they don't really get to that 15D. Like 15D in rope, what we're talking about is because you're testing a bunch of overhung physical movement for really long periods of time. If you give a grade to a shorter problem at a lower angle, it starts to get really like, how hard can you actually, like, have you ever seen a V15 slab boulder problem? Like, no, because it's you don't really see boulders that hard. So if you grade a slab boulder problem V10, it's very hard. So too big to flail is like a V10 slab, but just graded at the slab. And so people get this mixed up all the time. They're like, oh, but Ambrosia's harder than too big to flail. I'm like, no, not even close, actually. Like, if you do Ambrosia, you've done Ambrosia. If you do too big to flail, you're like one of the better highballers like ever. Well, there's another, I don't know if this is something that Dan would like be okay with me talking about, but there's another highball that's been done in Bishop that is even harder grade wise, difficulty wise than this project I'm looking at. And it's called Tears of Uncertainty. It goes on the backside of the Grandma Peabody. This guy, Miles, I think Anderson, did basically most of Tears of Uncertainty and then just cut directly left at like the 40-foot mark or so to join the Southwest Direct. Well, Dan had already, I think, pre-established this line that goes all the way up to the top, and the crux was at the very top of this boulder problem. He had showed me like some like 50 rope descents, and he was like, I think I feel comfortable, and one day he did it. There's no footage out there, like, I'm sure he's got the footage, but he's not one to like gloat about his highballing, which I very much respect. But just for context, like that's one of the hardest highballs in the world. Well, the reason for that context is because he said he would not take the rope off on this too big to fill project, even though it's a grade easier. And so like I really wanted to paint that picture because I can't go and explain to you the moves or the holds or like the type of holds. I can explain to you what does the style of this movement and the difficulty of this movement make you feel if you consider taking the rope off. Now going to like how I did some of these moves, it was just absurd. Like I was just trying, I can send you pictures of the holds, Josh. They're super cool. But there's like really stretched out positions where you have feet like at your hip line. Like you have to get your feet in really contorted positions and just like reach as far as you can on like atrocious holds. And I was psyched on how the moves were. And then I started thinking about taking the rope off, which is natural when you like consider maybe one day highballing. And basically my assessment of it, and in terms of today and for the trip, I told Brennan, I was like, for your comfort, it would take me another like year's worth of trips to even get to the point where I could probably do this on TR. Once you do something on TR, on top rope, like once you actually do a whole line on TR, then goes into the assessment phase of like how comfortable and what style and like what's the feeling and the sensation I need to be at any given point to consider taking the rope off. On any other highball I had done, I was lucky that moment came very quickly. And I didn't need that much validation to like take the rope off on a lot of these things because honestly, I just found the answers that gave me confidence very quickly. Like on Too Big to Flail, I took me 3 sessions to send it on TR. That session, I did it 3 times. I did the boulder ropeless the next session. Like basically that session I did it, was super tired, super cold. My fingers were raw. And I was like, oh, I finally figured out some things that like got me confident on these moves that I thought I was going to fall on. And I was like, oh, if I do it again, like surely I will not fall. And I was like, but maybe I'll take another session to like do it again. Did it again. And I was like, oh, dang, I'm super tired and my skin hurts like crazy. But if I do it again right now, like 3rd lap in a row on this day, I actually think I'll never fall on it. So I did it again. And I was like, that's all I needed to know. I took 2 rest days and I did the next day. And that was for me really confident. That process is not going to happen on this boulder. This project is absurd. I think it's like V11 slab climbing to get to like the 20-foot mark. You have no breaks. On Too Big to Flail, you do like, I think V9 sustained hard crimp climbing on the stained glass type of, Bishop granite to get to this like pocket with a good foot stance, and then you can shake out before you do like the next crux. Then you do like a couple more like V5 sections to the top. This other project is like, yeah, sure, maybe the hardest moves aren't, that much harder than like too big to fail hardest moves, which are for me super hard, but that you just have no break. And then you do like basically the crux type climbing on too big to flail to the top until it's like the last 10 feet, and then you kind of chilling. And yeah, and it's funny because every time Brennan was filming me, I'm like, oh, I think the section's a little bit better. I would fall. And I'd be like, dang, like I don't think this is really. So that's the kind of the story for the boulder. But I have other thoughts, but I'll let you.
Okay, that's terrifying. My hands are sweating, and I want to further paint this picture because I think it was cool that you said that Too Big to Flail may be the best highball in the world. I never really thought about that, but it is beautiful. When you hike out there and you see it, and you have the big Sierras, snow-capped mountains sitting in the background, like I mean, all the videos do it justice. It does. It is that impressive. And I had a similar thing to you, where when I did Luminance, I peered off the top, and I was just like, no way am I going to. For me, I was like, no way will I ever do this. So you have this big sheer face of like, yeah, maybe a 70-foot boulder or something, too big to flail. I don't know. It's not a terrible trending line, but it's on the left side, and so I didn't know that this goes just straight up the gut. Like, and so,
It deviates almost
oh
nothing.
god, and dude, I don't know if we can have all that stuff in there about Dan. I'll have to check with him because I
Yeah,
know about
yeah.
Tears of Uncertainty, and I think he didn't want that out there because he was worried that people might do it or
I
get
know, but
hurt.
another thing
Yeah.
is that it's in the book. And
Oh, okay.
nowadays, I didn't even know this, but like people came to me while I was like on the line, and they were like, "Oh, is this that V13 project?" And I was like, "What? Who even knows what grade this thing is? Like, who's grading this project V13? It's like it's a horrible grade to give it, but whatever. Like, it's just a poor representation. We're talking about style. Like, it's not a representation of Highball, but Tears of Uncertainty is in the book, and I guess like Dan, if
Interesting.
you hear this, or like if this is what we're talking about, like if people do know about it, I want them to know the story, right? Like I want them to at least give respect to the first person who had done it. Maybe anything beyond that, but like currently people don't really know, and people consider like the hardest highball in Bishop to be like too tall to fall, which is the miles line that cuts like halfway of
Yeah.
the Tears of Uncertainty. That's just crazy to me. Like too big to fail is harder than too tall to fall. It has to be that way. Like I think Ambrosia's probably harder, and like that video has like the most views out there. There's just a lot of misinformation, I think, for like, and there's a ton of respect that I have, like beyond respect for Dan for doing Tears. And maybe people don't have to feel that, but I definitely don't want the misinformation out there being like, oh, is Tears even done? I'm like, of course it's been done. This guy is
I have
crazy
a
gonna
ton of
do it.
respect for Dan for a number of reasons other than just that line. I think I might have seen the
Of
video
course.
actually too. It was a while ago.
Yeah, it was a
Interestingly
couple
enough.
years.
So this is just to the right of Too Big to Flail, and it goes straight up, and it's harder. And so does that mean it's taller as well?
Oh, I don't think it's that much taller. If it was taller, like it starts on the same hold. Like it actually
Oh,
starts
it
on the exact
does.
same jug. Yeah.
Oh,
That's
that's
why it's like
sick, dude.
it's a sicker line, because it just like you start climbing on too big and you immediately trend left, but there's this huge jug. And like, dude, Bishop doesn't even like grant you that many jugs. It's like one of the cooler jugs out there in Bishop. And then it's like, a couple really positive holds and then just empty drywall. And it's just absurd.
Okay, well, I I'm glad that it sounds like you're not about to just completely dive into it fully because I always worry about you, and it was always scary when you did focus. And actually, something I want to call out that is really interesting and just shows how real of a highballer you are is you started talking about risk, and what you said was you said like risk. I think you said, I'm just going to paraphrase something about like risk to others. And it's funny because as I hear you say it, I'm thinking about you getting hurt. But what you were talking about is, look, if I fall and I break my leg or some people are going to have to deal with me, like I'm putting this on their shoulders. And I just love that that's where your head goes versus just like, oh, I mean, you said I don't want to die, but it's also like, gosh, I have to put a bunch of pressure and stress on everyone around me. I just wanted to like highlight that because I think that may have been obvious to you. But when I heard it, I was like, oh, I know what he's talking about. He's not talking about just himself. So, um, yeah, the thing I'm just still kind of curious about is that I mean, I can see you light up talking about it, and like there's a challenge there, and it's like, oh, it's fucking sick, and like you gotta get your feet way up. Like, what's this draw feel like now as you get older, as you're more established in a career, outside of just climbing? And even though it might still, it might be, well, it might be the coolest high ball in the world. If you did it, it would definitely make news. Um, but like, what's your relationship to it now at this time in your life?
Yeah. This is actually the part where I wish I took like notes or thought about it more before this conversation. So just yeah, I work a full-time job. This is super last minute pod. So just for the context of the viewers, like this is super raw. So like one day I might change my thoughts. And obviously everything that was said was pretty raw. But just a point that you had made previously about risk assessment for my peers. Just because I need to give a little bit credit to my mom here. I didn't always think this way. I just assumed my friends would be there. And I assumed that anyone who would be there would just help. And it wasn't really until focus or like until kind of a recent conversation with my mom. Because this is on air, I told her that this would probably be my last, and like probably my last like real highball, like that I consider highball. And she started crying like instantly. And she was like, you don't understand like how much weight, like knowing that you might just be too psyched on something and like go for it by any means necessary. Cause she's like, I know who you are. She's like, I know that you would just like try to go do it by any means necessary. So this is kind of to your point. Like it's a totally different, like, I'm not saying that I'll do anything by any necessary just cause I'm psyched, but like, if that's how she interpreted it, like, yeah, that's a ton of weight to consider. I talked about like, there's actually a quote that Honnold had in one of his, I think his Too Big to Fail video, like one of the segments where his feeling on it, I didn't actually know this until I just rewatched it a couple days ago, where he was like, it's just something that needs to get done. And that's a perspective I've always had. And just so happens that these scary lines, like, they don't even get talked about being done, dude. Like, I'm this psyched on it, but like, no, the conversation of getting to psyched isn't there, Josh, because most people first consider the risk. And my mom told me on the phone, she was like, don't hate on people to overassess the risk, because that means that they care way more about the people who would care about if they got hurt. And that just made me sit, and I was like, dang, like, all right, now I feel like now I feel way more like a
Mom
dick.
wisdom right there.
It's super mom wisdom. But I was like, okay, thank you for that. I was like, I respect everybody. I don't want this to like come out as a judgment that like, I'm better than other people or whatever because I've got the balls. Like, no, whatever. Like, if anything, that's in some ways, you're right, mom. That's like probably worse. But for focus at that time, because these also the specific group of people and how many people like I needed to come out for focus because there was just so much pad moving, lots of filming going on. Like I had real conversations with a lot of these people who were there, and I was like, you guys need to have conversations amongst yourselves to make sure you guys have a plan. But I was like, I just want you to know, like, that means a ton, like thank you guys for being here and stuff like that. That was a very evident conversation, and it will absolutely be one in the future. But on my personal side, to me, there's two completely exclusive things, Josh. I want to get this very clear, and I want this to be hopefully a framing for people. I'm being kind of careful with my language here because I'm like Dan too. I told you I don't want Will to go in highball. Like that's incredibly scary for me. Selfishly, I don't want Will to highball, but it's like, but what does he get if he does explore that world? And it's like human lives are as long as your human life is. And like, hey, I'm not here to tell you that if you find more meaning in a shorter part of your life, and that's worth the risk for you to not have their whole life, I'm not here to tell you that that's wrong, and nobody's going to tell me that's wrong either, right? And like I'm willing to make that assessment. Now that assessment has changed, but I'll get to that. But I think what I want to get out of this little sharing of my perspective here is I think they're two completely exclusive things to look at. How psyched can something make you, and how willing would you be to just get that thing done? And then how important is it for you to keep what you have going on right now? And then, of course, you have to do the math a little bit to be like, do they fight each other? Like, how bad is it if they fight each other? Like, that's up to me to decide at that point. But currently, just to share some context into what Josh is talking about, before like this year, I had very different incentives and life values. I would do anything for my climbing, honestly, probably. I did a lot, pretty much anything for my climbing up to, certain things. But nowadays I have a full-time job. I have a puppy. again, see, like I'm just trying to observe it the way that it is. It still doesn't correlate the same way. My boss is a climber, like my employer is a climber, and he does talk to me kind of deeply about the highball stuff, and he definitely doesn't want me to go and die. Like that would be a major waste of his, investment into me as an employee, right? Like I think there's a lot of real conversation there. But the exclusive psych is the exclusive psych, man. Like if I have the absolute blessing of an opportunity to look at this face and observe how cool it is, and if I'm the only person in the world who sees it that way, I'll take that as a blessing. If Honnold's the only person ever who looks at Freerider and is like, but dude, how sick would it be to climb this thing without a rope? And like, I think I can do it. Like, let him. First of all, let him. And like that, yeah, is fucking sick, dude. Like that is amazing. And I just want to first grant anyone who has psych, no matter how dangerous it is, or like, yes, assess the risk. Like we're gonna talk about this next. But I would definitely urge anyone to listen to your psych. And because I think the mistake that a lot of people make is they listen to the assessment first, but that's not how it works. You should listen to your psych and then assess, like what we're talking about right now. Like, okay, I'm definitely psyched, but is it 100% that I'm going to do this project? No, definitely not. That's going to be dependent on that day. What's my confidence level on it? What's the risk analysis like? And then how important is the rest of my life right now? Which sucks that in my mind, that's how it turns out to be. But I feel like I can get this climb to be at a threshold. Currently, with my understanding with rock climbing, my understanding of myself, my understanding of that climb, I think it's as fucked of a threshold that I would be ever willing to go to. But I think it's there. Does that make sense? Like, I think I can make it to something that I should be confident enough on to not lose my life. That's what I feel.
Dude, period. That's epic. I just looked up this quote. It's something along the lines of like when George Mallory was asked why he climbed Everest, he said, well, because it's there. And just that idea, although I gotta say, as I don't know, I think ChatGPT said this, so you always gotta take ChatGPT with a grain of salt. Sometimes they hallucinate. It said like, and he perished on Everest or something on like his third attempt or something. But I thought he was like the first to climb it, or that was Sir Edmund Hillary in Tenzing, Norway, right? All right. Anyways, the reason why I bring it up is that quote from Honnold reminded me of that. And then what you're saying really reminds me of just all of that. And it's just this interesting idea of like, I don't know, like I see it. Someone's got to do it. Why not me? I'm psyched. And I thought that was, I don't know, I'd never heard someone put it this way where you're like, no, I get all the stuff that I am risking, but you're like, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about psych, and then they clash, and we can talk about that, but that they're separate in your head. And I just think there's something really deeply interesting about that fundamental intrinsic motivation. And Tim, this podcast often talks about how I go from good to great, and I did this episode where I kind of talked about some of the things that I had seen from talking to athletes and asking them how you go from good to great. And one of the common things was that to really achieve greatness, it has to be this deep intrinsic motivation that, no matter how big the accolades are, it's like, dude, I would not do too big to flail for any amount of money. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe I feel like I could actually do it. Okay. I would not do Freerider for any amount of money. Like I would not solo Freerider for any amount of money. Like at some level, like there's just danger that like the bribery, the extrinsic motivation, the fame or the money or whatever the thing is that you think you're going to get can never drive you to actual greatness. That always has to come from something very deep inside of you. And so I just want to echo what you said there, because I found that really interesting.
Yeah. Dane, can I share something? Yeah, I just thought about the same thing. I'm like, yeah, I would never free solo Freerider for any amount of money. I would never have done Too Big to Flail for any amount of money either. That's what showed me my actual motivation for doing something like Too Big to Flail or like Focus was just, I just was curious. Actually, I'm just curious if it was possible. And it's something that you're saying, it's actually was going to be my like tip for going from good to great, or like what takes, even though I've shared a lot of them. This might even be repeat iteration of something I said in the past. And it's a slight deviation from what you're saying about how deeply you have to care for something. I don't think that's not how I interpret it. I just think it has to be extremely original. I think it has to be yours. It doesn't have to be that deep. Like, it's not that deep to me, dude. Like, it's not that. It's very obvious, actually. It's super obvious to me to show up to like certain challenges. It's actually super obvious when I'm not motivated about certain things. So it's very obvious to me when I'm motivated. Even in the same sport, in the same activity, in the same area, I could be like super not motivated about certain things, and that can change over time. But one thing's never changed is if something's scary to me, if something is like curious, if I'm capable of doing that, that's super interesting to me. And I just and if the process changes while I'm trying it, or I'm like, oh, I'll never get there, then my motivation drops, right? And then if you start offering me billions of dollars to then risk my life, I probably would. First of all, I'd probably fail because what does motivation do? It goes through that whole process of like how you actually improve and get to the place where you're gonna gain the, what actually physically, technically, and mentally you need to do. Well, that takes a ton of work. That work is fueled by care, right? And so if the care is original, then you actually think the way that you need to think to get to that level. And that's also why maybe I feel kind of confident that I can do this thing one day if I care in the right way for long enough. If I care about this challenge, Josh, the way that I didn't start caring about it until I pulled on the rope. Like, I knew that I would care about it. So that's why I urged myself to get on the rope. Then I got on the rope and I was like, dang it, dude. Like, I'm so psyched on it. But luckily for me and for my friends and for my family, or, for anyone who cares about me not dying, like, I just also know that I'll have to care for a really long time. I'll have to really put in the work. And that feasibility is kind of unlikely, right? I have a full-time job now. I have to do the time in Bishop. I have to do the time on that style. And that's a major, major, major contingency that I think is super unlikely. So luckily, if you're listening, probably won't happen. But I'm going to try really hard to make it happen given my life constraints, because I care so much about it. There's actually nothing in my mind right now in climbing that I think about more. That's it. I'm just realizing this stuff, and like that's just how it's always been. I kind of wish it was like Lucid. I kind of wish it was like Defying Gravity. To be honest with you, like I definitely wish that the things that I cared about like the most were safe. But I don't. I care about the stuff that's super scary, and like I get super scared. Like, I think this is just another thing to clean up. Like, people assume that I'm like Honnold, and maybe people also assume that just because like people have said things about Honnold that's how we feel. You don't know how Honnold feels. You have no idea what goes on in his mind. You have no idea what his actual sensation is in his mind when he's in certain places or certain positions on the wall. But I can tell you mine, and I am absolutely terrified just to be in any position. It makes me sick to my stomach. But like, just like anything else that makes you sick to your stomach, if you do the work to, make it more digestible, it's just like you being on the rope, like I said, and trusting this foot rock over. Like, somehow you've made up a narrative in your mind that bad things will happen. Once you know the bad things that would happen or how likely they are to happen, that you can work to make sure it doesn't happen in some way, you understand the volatility of certain things, then you can make your bets a little bit better. And I'm a betting man, like we said.
Lots of bets. It's a theme of ours.
Oh yeah.
This is why I love podcasts and I love the rawness, is that if you watch these videos, I guess I kind of shared this on that Mallorca clip, where when you see me, or maybe a better example is you on Focus, where you just watch the person climb. They just execute. They put that foot where it's supposed to be. They trust it. You're just like, oh yeah, like look at that robot go. Wow, just like, fearless superhuman. And then inside your head, you're like, I am terrified. Sometimes you're like, what am I doing here? No, I got this. Like I'm going for it. And just that cacophony of different voices in your head is the truth. And I like giving that behind the scenes, or that other point of view, the real point of view, the first person point of
Yeah.
view. And so um thanks for always sharing the rawness. Thanks for hopping on with me a little more impromptu. I've just been psyching. I've been feeling like I'm out of baby jail. My kids are getting older and I'm getting out to Bishop, seeing the young bloods do their thing. And also it's been exciting, as we were talking about for like 2 hours. It's an exciting time in climbing and things are just going great. And also I knew that you did take a peek at the highest of Highballs, arguably maybe the best undone highball line that's well known in the world, based on what you said. So Tim, always a pleasure, my dude.
Always a pleasure, Josh. I'm also psyched. I'm super happy that you're psyched. I'm super psyched, man. I'm also training, and yeah, I mean, we talk about highballing with me and stuff, but I recently, for the first time in like 3 years, started training a little bit. It definitely came from this Bishop trip, like absolutely, but also like I've been just getting back into climbing for like 6 months or so straight, and it's like definitely time for me to like I'm another thing I totally didn't say before, but like I'm climbing better than I have, and I'm like measurably I could tell you the numbers, Josh, that I've been assessing myself on, and it is like significant, very significant how much weaker I am in many metrics. But hey, never stuck that move on trios before, which is just crazy. Like I can't even hangboard, not even remotely what I've been able to hangboard in the past. Can't do weighted pull-ups, not even remotely close to what I've done in the past. Like some things are about the same, like core or some things. Like some things lead you very far and maintain. Like somehow I can still do one arm pull-ups, but like just for context, 2 years ago I had a video of me doing like 8 clean. And like if I can do 2 or 3 right now, I'm like very psyched.
Oh, you can
like,
just do 2 or 3. That's nothing.
ah.
It's just a joke.
Yeah, it's like crazy that stayed with me, but dude, I used to be able to do so much more, which is just absurd. But yeah, that's why I think it's not the lead domino in climbing harder. Of course, to share more context.
Yeah,
but...
if only we did some episodes on that. If only there was some more info about that. Yeah, check out the history of me and Tim have done a bunch of really good deep dives. Just on helping everyone get actually better on climbing. And yeah, dude, psyched to have you hop on and just share my psych and be a sounding board, because I don't know, I'm excited too. And it's funny how you said, oh, I went out to Bishop and it got me psyched to train. And I what's funny is like, that's how it works for me too, where I get excited about a project or even just like, I don't know, just even going out to Bishop and being like, oh yeah, like I love this. I've been training a little bit more, it's funny. It's like, rather than try to force yourself into doing more work where you're kind of like, cracking the whip on your back, like, oh, I need to train. In some ways, when you get psyched, it's effortless. Like I just have more energy instead of being like, oh, I'm going to, watch Netflix tonight. I'm like, oh dude, maybe I could do a hangboard session, even though it's like 8 PM. I don't actually do that. I watch Netflix, but I don't drink.
No, but I'm with
I'll
you,
skip
though.
the beer. I'll be like, oh, maybe I won't drink another glass of wine. There you go.
Massive progress.
All right,
Thanks
man.
for having me on, Josh. I have a blast. Hope I'm not too rusty. I know I was like totally interrupting you and or having the, you're not supposed to respond like as people were saying things, and I was just like correcting myself.
Tim, you're giving all the like podcasting secrets, the behind the scenes of what makes a podcast subtly different from a conversation. But no, Tim, you're a pro. And my favorite thing about getting to talk to you is that you're yourself. You're right here. And I think that's what really matters. As he flex it out, bro. Okay, man. Tim, my dude, until next time. And I hope that next time is soon.
All right. See you guys.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like even more content, go to patreon.com/testpiece. And while you're at it, share this podcast with someone you know who would love it. And please leave us a review or rating at wherever you get your podcasts. We've also got tons of great content on YouTube and Instagram, so don't forget to like and subscribe there. Okay, see you next week.